Hello. Hello. Welcome, everyone who's joining us today. We'll let folks trickle into the virtual rooms here. Really excited to be introducing this panel. Welcome to VSFF. My name is Emily Weldon. I'm also joined here by Nicholas Hervé Barona. We are the festival co-directors of Vancouver Short Film Festival, and we're really excited to be presenting this panel series this weekend, VSFF at Home, Shorts to Features. There's been so much great conversation already today, and excited for our cinematography panel coming up right now. As we're getting started, I wanted to begin by acknowledging that the Vancouver Short Film Festival and the city of Vancouver, where we work and operate, is located on the unceded shared traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. If you'd like to learn more about these and other Indigenous territories where we live, work, and create, you can learn more at native-land.ca. That's a great resource as well.
Thank you so much, Emily. And some announcements before we get started. The Vancouver Short Film Festival is very proud to announce that we will be back live and in person at the Van City Theatre in downtown for a retrospective screening of the festival's 2021 and 2022 programs this June 17th and 18th, so mark the date. More information to come soon. Follow us on social media for that. Moving forward to this panel, we would like to thank Creative BC for supporting this panel series, and we would also like to thank our community partners that have helped us along for the last 2 years with this series. This will be Cinevic, the Kamloops Film Society, as well as the Vancouver International Film Festival. We hope to continue being able to educate the community through professional development panels, such as this one. So we've got an awesome creative bunch here with us today once again. So without further ado, let me introduce Avi Glanzer, our moderator for the next 2 days of panels. Avi is our outreach and community partnership coordinator, as well as development at the Vancouver Short Film Festival.
Hello. Hello and welcome to the VSFF at Home Shorts to Feature panel series. This is the Cinematographers panel. My name is Avi Glanzer, and I will be moderating this panel for you all today. We wanted to create a series of panels that would illuminate the movement from short films to feature films by speaking with a number of filmmakers who've recently made that step. What we're going to do today is we're going to ask a series of questions relating to various phases of production and hearing about those filmmakers' experiences. But first, I want to remind everyone that on Sunday, after our final panel ends around 3 p.m., we will be having a round of VSFF Keep It Short meetings, speed meetings. We would love for you to join us, and you can do so by registering at vsff.com. There's a registration link. If you do so, we'll be able to send you an invitation tomorrow to join us. Now, let's introduce our panel. Let's bring them on. For our cinematography panel today, we have with us Andy Hodgson and Alfonso Chin. Hello, everyone.
How are you?
How's everyone doing?
So tell us who you are, where you're from, and what you did As Long As You Love Me.
Andy, go ahead. You go first.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for having me on the previous panel.
Absolutely.
I'm Andy Hodgson, born and raised in South America, raised in the Middle East. Came to Vancouver to film school and ended up loving cinematography. Graduated 2004 from Capilano cinematography course. And from then on, I had been doing cinematography for short films, music videos, feature films, and now mainly network TV. It's kind of my background.
And Alfonso.
Nice. I also have a very multicultural background. I was born in Mexico. Then I lived in LA throughout most of my, high school years. Then decided to go somewhere else, study, came to Vancouver and switched my career, dishonored my family a little bit, and went to film. And I didn't know I was going to become a cinematographer, but I knew I was very into images and visual stuff. And so it just happened that I remember one day in film school, I was doing a lighting workshop, and then just kind of the light bulb literally just went on, and I was just like, okay, maybe this is what I want to do. And so ever since I've just been doing a lot of different stuff. But I think for me, I come more from the fine arts and interactive arts background, because I was very into that as well. And so, now I do commercials, music videos, feature as well. And I'm trying to get into doing more series, I would say, because I think that's where the story could develop a lot more in long term. And I think it's more exciting for me than my next challenge to try to tackle. That's kind of my brief introduction, I guess.
Very cool. I'm so excited to have the both of you here today. You are two of my favorite cinematographers from the city. I have had a chance to work with both of you guys for a long amount of time. I think with Andy, it's been about 10 years, and Alfonso, it's been at least over 5, if not 7.
Yeah.
And your guys' work is absolutely stunning. And I've just been having a great time watching you guys grow as cinematographers over the course of my career. So thank you for joining us today. Hopefully we can illuminate, it's my pun, the world of cinematography to a new generation of emerging artists. Let's dive right in. We're going to start with the pre-production phase. So as this works, most, if not every question is going to include the phrase, how does this differ between shorts and features? So I'm going to ask it anyway, even though it's going to come off as a bit repetitive. So let's start at the beginning. What do you look for when deciding to take on a project? Does what you look for differ between shorts and features? Let's open with Alfonso.
Ooh, I think for me, feature is such a personal thing, I guess. And I tried to make a pact with myself when I was coming up, and I loved cinema so much that I was like, okay, I need to really do work that is personal to me. And so whenever I read a script, I usually ask 2 questions to myself: is like, why do you want to make it, and is it important to the director? So usually when I have a meeting with the director, I say, why is this important to you? And then they usually give me an answer, and usually that kind of dictates how it's gonna go. And I think that question for me is very important, because I found over the years that when you care about the project, and if a director doesn't care as much, there's a disconnect and doesn't have the same harmony. So when we both connect and try to push the film or the feature, that's when it's magical to me, and I get very excited because then the other person's excited and everyone gets excited. So there's it sparks throughout. So for me is that, and but it really comes from the script as well. I have to read it, and so another thing that I do a lot is I just say no to a lot of features too. Like it's important to say yes, but also it's important to say no. And so I think very often that's my process. It's like, is this for me? And if not, I'll recommend someone else. I think this style, what I'm hearing is more suitable for this other cinematographer. And so that's kind of my approach to features and how I choose projects.
Andy, let's hear from you.
Awesome. Well, I mean, Alfonso hit a lot of good points there. Definitely, I think for me is story driven. The end goal, I kind of mentioned this in the producing factor, but still in the cinematography, it's like, what is the vision for the director? What is his end goal? And where is he looking to get this sort of scene? Because again, stories are very powerful. Even now that I'm getting into directing my own stories through cinematography, I find it really important to connect with the story. Absolutely, number one. I will touch base though, doing network TV right now has really taught me to also do cinematography as a job, because I come from both backgrounds, and I really do love connecting to story, but it's really interesting now having to jump the last 3 years for like shooting for these different networks and how different cinematography is and how you're sort of working in a different scale. It's been really amazing, actually, the process. But first of all and foremost is the story for me and what that end goal looks like. For short films, a little bit more on the experimental side, I'm willing to kind of bend a little more. I think short films for me is more to help the director in the project. People are trying to come up, and I think when I go do short films for other people, it's really important for me to understand that through my cinematography, I'm also helping these younger generation like come up and learn from me. So that's kind of.
Okay.
I find short films really hard to make, maybe because short films is you don't have much time to tell a story, and then you have to be very concise with that. And I think it's very true. It's like if directors can tell very good short films, it's a good pivot to features, because I think features is much easier than short films.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the less amount of time you can tell something, it's harder.
Yeah,
I guess that makes sense, because you when you're doing a short and you have every scene has to be condensed into your 3 or 4 day time schedule, there's not really much flexibility inside of that, nor is there any room for really experimentation. You're just kind of getting your shots, getting your scenes out, right?
Yeah, I think there's that the logistic of that, but even telling the story, you can develop a full arc of a character in 10-15 minutes, and so you have to really say a lot, but not saying a lot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Through the vision, especially in shorts, through cinematography, it's like, how am I able to tell this story that's in 3 minutes condensed with the most important shots that's really going to portray what I'm trying to say, right? And I think in coming from a background of shooting tons of shorts, I mean, you look at my IMDb, I thank all the short films that I've done, because they've really propelled me to do the feature films and now kind of move to network TV. So we always kind of have to remember too that involving cinematography in a short film is not the amount of shots that you get, it's more the importance of the look of that specific shot that's going to portray maybe that 3 minute,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Move on to the next question. What does your process look like in pre-production, and how does it differ between shorts and features? I have a follow-up for this as well, but let's hear your guys on this part.
Sure, I can start.
Yeah.
For me, for short films, yes, I do want to know everything about pre-production and really get myself involved with the script and with the director, with the production designer. But sometimes for short films, I also like it to be a little bit more experimental. Like, let's go in with a plan, but let's see what we get on the day. I think that's the time for us to play. Feature films are definitely different. my pre-production stage, I mean, begins with, you know, even references, talking to the director, you know, combing over the script, you know, seeing what our values are, what our differences are within the story. You know, locations, those are really important. I think I touched base in production design. You know, 90% of the time that I think my lighting looks amazing is because the location is incredible and the production design really stands out. So working with that, with the production designers is really important. And also just really kind of connecting to the story. I do a lot of meditation and mindfulness and really just making sure that it's something that I want to dive into and I can see it, how I can push and help the project move forward. So.
And Alfonso.
I love shooting short films because it's always so challenging. It's like Andy said, it's a good platform to experiment with things because of the nature of you have to express a lot, and usually it's in an abstract way or in a very you know, a visual way that tells the mood very quickly. So I love doing that, and I still do short films, even though my schedule is getting harder and harder to fit short films these days. But I still try as much as I can, the pre-production is always very interesting for me with short films because it's now you have a lot of money to do a lot of different things, and I'm finding short films, the stories in the world itself is getting bigger and bigger. So it's getting a lot more challenging to try to create the world, and the resources are less. It's part of the challenge, and that's what I like about it too. And you know, like you can get all the tools you want in you know, a different feature. But in short films, I find it's very limiting, and it pushes me to think outside the box, and very often is location, as Andy said, and production design, and I like to push production design a little bit more, just to fit into the world and what needs to be extracted. Like, you know, doesn't belong there, and maybe we need to do something else. So I'm very attentive of visual distractions, that things are not supposed to be there. It needs to be somehow removed or do something to it, or instead of shooting daytime, maybe shoot at night, you know, things like that. I prep the way I prep is almost like the way I used to play, because I used to play basketball, volleyball in high school. And I remember just the training and all that. You might think, you know, the practice is, why do we need to practice? Why do we need to try, you know, and the spike and all those things? It's so that it allows you on the day to be more flexible and improvise and do all those things. And then that's when you start to really enjoy the process a lot more than trying to solve all the problems on the day. And so I think short films, the more you can enjoy the shooting process, the better it is. And usually the more prep you have is better. I think I very religiously tracking the direction of the sun. I think that's something I always try to anticipate in advance as much as possible, in short films especially, because you don't have a lot of resources to recreate the sun, and especially if it's daytime. So I do that a lot, and I usually reject locations based on the sun direction, or if the space doesn't allocate what it needs to, because you don't have much time really in short films as well, because you have to shoot so many pages sometimes, or the setups are very complicated in certain tight spaces. So
Can you guys speak to like what your first steps are when you come onto a project, aside from like speaking with the director about their vision? Like, what do you do for your side of the process first? Let's just keep the same order here. Let's go with Andy.
Sorry, repeat that one again.
When you first come onto a project, aside from like speaking to the director and involving yourself in their vision and whatnot, what are the first steps that you take in terms of like furthering your process? Like, are we talking about like like doing mood boards and color boards? Do you get your inspiration from location scouting? Like, what's your starting point?
Absolutely. For me, would be sort of kind of referencing like Pinterest or anything that the director and I are kind of looking at. Definitely the locations would be a big one for me as well. You know, Alfonso nailed it, you know, kind of the direction of the sun and where is it going to play at what specific time in the scene. But it's just kind of going back to like, how do I connect? And I just keep saying this because connecting to the story is just really, really important, you know, and seeing what sort of, okay, how am I going to view this? What lenses can I start using? You know, what camera does it really, it's going to work and play for this film, because not every time you're going to use the same camera, or perhaps you're going to use the same lenses. And for me specifically, I don't need a high-tech set of lenses, or I don't need a specific high-end camera for the specific kind of project that we're doing. So I kind of begin to kind of process that, in terms of like, okay, how am I going to use the lenses that I can get, or the camera that I can have, specifically for short films, because as Alfonso says, they don't have much budget as well. So sometimes you don't get some of the gear that you need, as well as, how am I going to start? What kind of lighting am I going to use? What am I going to need to bring onto this project that's going to really help me, but also not, break the bank account, for example, for a short film, or depending on the number of crew that you have. So those are kind of really the points that I look at in terms of like, what gear am I going to start utilizing for what scenes, really breaking down the scenes through the script, and then just kind of train that right, all the other departments.
Mm-hmm. And Alfonso?
Can you repeat the question again? I'm trying to make sure I answer it correctly.
When you first pick on a project, aside from speaking to the director about their vision and kind of their perspective, what are the steps that you take first in terms of like starting your process?
That's a very good question, actually. I don't jump into gears right away usually. That's probably the last thing I'm more excited about, because because of the budget in short film, usually you don't have all the options, so you have to kind of roughly what are your tools. I think I love reading a lot, so I always try and dissect the meaning as much as I can. On every word and how the director sees it, as much as is it our medium to visual tell it, but I think underneath it I have to understand the director, because every director is basically the author of the tone and the voice of the piece, and I'm trying to understand that a little bit further, and what is that voice that he's trying to interpret the story from, and finding the harmony, even also trying to find that creative harmony between us, because differences prone to happen, but then it's trying to find a harmony of, this is how I saw it, this is how he or she sees it, and trying to work out that harmony between the voice of the piece. And once I get a sense of that, I really also dissect how the director sees the world in general. So I will pull a lot of different stills and from Instagram or from movie stills, from everywhere, or paintings. And then I'll try to do this like a Rorschach effect. I find directors kind of sees the world in a very specific way. So I'm trying to understand the Rorschach thing. And it's like, what do you think of this image? How does it make you feel? What is it that you don't like about this? Or, like, I like this image because of this, and what do you think of it? So eventually you start to get a sense of how the director sees the world. And then that's when I have a better sense of how to narrow down everything. And then I go into the gears. Then I'll say, okay, he or she sees the world more like anamorphic, or for the piece of the script, sees it more like anamorphic or spherical very often, and even the aspect ratio, how he or she sees it. And like it all trickles from all of those things. And very often what I do a lot is, and it goes back to the experimentation part of it. Perhaps the time period or whatever the story takes place, I don't like use clean lights as much, because I think always now the technology is pushing to have very clean lights. But I remember, like, in reality, because I come from documentaries, when you see the world, none of the lights is clean. Like some lights have just been there for like ages, and the colors start to deteriorate or something. So I actually try to dirty up these lights, try to make it more authentic to the scene instead of. So very often I also use lower CRI on lights, and things like that. So I try to push that as well, and I do that now a lot also on high budget. On the last feature, I do that quite a bit as well. So that's how I push, I guess, how to do things. I always experiment it with short films, and then I bring it on to feature if it works well. And same methodology. I think prepping a short is very similar in a way to prepping features. It's just a longer period and more stamina and less sleep over the days.
And I do want to touch base on that point. just shooting a little bit more realistic, like the less lights now that you use, it's like really important, and I always say this, like, what's the most important light on set? It's the one you turn off, and it's kind of like, the less you can do cinematically with having to add additional light, it just becomes more realistic and just more in touch and in tune with the story, and what you're trying to say. And I also feel like it portrays back to like the actors as well, the way, they're being blasted with a light, or are they actually feeling something natural kind of falling off on them? So
it's a luxury we get nowadays with the cameras being able to capture such a wide range. Let's move on to the next question. How much of the process of drafting a shot list do you want to be involved in? Has this differed between directors that you've worked with, and also between shorts and features? And I'll open with Alfonso on this one.
It's a good one, shot listing. It's such a mystery to me how to properly shot list scenes in particular. I think it also depends on the background of the director. If director comes from more of a narrative short or feature world, their shot list is very different from TV directors. I've experienced that quite a bit, and I usually try to pull back on too many shot lists. But what I encourage to do a lot is write down all the shots and then distill it down from there, so that on the day when we're actually shooting the shot, we know what are the essential shots versus trying to grab everything. But at least we went through it. We process every shot. It doesn't matter how mundane or cliche the shots are. It's always a conversation shot listing for me with the director, trying to understand what's priority on the shot. So for me, it's about trying to figure it out again, how the director sees the scene and the world. And then from there, I distill it down. And on the day, very often you don't get the full shot list. You have to compromise as well. Or sometimes you just shoot something that wasn't in the shot list, but that one shot says everything you need to tell in the next 3 shots. You don't need those 3 shots anymore, because so for me, shot listing is more like a practice to try to understand what we need on the day, and for scheduling usually as well.
Andy?
Yeah, shot listing is by far very, very important. I feel for me, the shot list is kind of the template and the model that you're going to go in with, sort of into kind of fixing this puzzle piece on how you're going to piece it together for the editor and what they're going to want to see in post-production in terms of editing. But also to be open and to be allowing that, when you get there and you see the blocking, well, things are probably going to change, and when you're sitting there with the actors and the actor says, well, I feel like I should probably go to this chair and go here. And you're like, no, but we shot listed it that you start from the couch, so I think there is a really important process to shot listing with the director and really allowing them, giving them the space to pick their shots. But then as the cinematographer is, how do I condense this like 3 shots, maybe in perhaps 1 shot? I will say something different now. I came from a lot of single camera shooting to now doing 2 cameras, A and B camera. And the shot listing has been really interesting because I hadn't been used to doing A and B camera all the time, every day A and B camera. And I found now that shot listing for feature films is a bit different for TV in my process. And I'm allowing B camera to be slightly more roaming in the shot list. So I shot list with the directors what A camera is going to do, but B camera is now allowing to capture things that perhaps is needed for the edits that are not really in the shot list. So it's been an interesting process. But yes, in all, definitely shot list, but be ready that on the day the blocking may change, and now you will have to adjust. And some of my best stuff has been stuff that hasn't even been on the shot list. I mean, I give great examples of like sometimes, the sun just falls in the right place, but you were looking at this spot and you're like, oh my God, it looks great here. Okay, let's just move here, block really quickly. So definitely shot lists are important, but I think in the process of cinematography, the older I get, the more I'm just allowing things to happen, because I love the experimentation. And even I'm doing it now more in the now that I'm getting my feet more wet in the network. I'm pushing the look more. I'm pushing the way we're doing shots. Maybe they're used to doing over the shoulders a lot. Well, now I'm doing a oneer, whereas they haven't seen that before. So it's been really interesting, the way the shot list kind of contrasts. And for short films, sometimes I just say, let's not even do a shot list. Let's just go in. Let's see what happens, and make it more free, because I think you need to experiment with all aspects.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But also find that it depends on the experience of the director. If it's like a first time on set, or first time, which happens sometimes, because maybe as a writer and then trying to direct his first narrative in a short film, then I find maybe the shot list process, or having a shot list, helps with that director particularly. And also I've experienced where there's no shot list, but also it's very inexperienced, and on the day it's just a lot of figuring it out, and a lot of the time is being needed. So it depends on experience on the director when you come to shot listing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. How valuable do you find storyboarding in this process as well? And have you had a lot of experience to be able to use storyboards, and have you used them on shorts? Have you used them on features? How have you kind of found that to be? Let's open with Andy on this one.
That's funny. Personally, no, man. A lot of the work I do has not been storyboarded. Ideally, maybe perhaps commercials work more with storyboards, but perhaps I haven't really done a lot of storyboards. We sometimes do like specific shots that we think are going to be storyboarded, but then again, 90% of my work, it has not been used. So I can't even really comment on that. We extensively work on storyboard. I think for us, the process with the director is really spending time at those locations, really going through things in pre-production. And again, for me, like I mentioned, I love long pre-production. So 6 months to a year perhaps. And I think in there you're building the storyboard. But personally, I know storyboards don't handcuff you, but they're kind of like the shot list, right? Personally. And so I think they are useful in some mediums, but then in other mediums, I think it's just more the aesthetics of what you're going to be capturing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Alfonso?
I find them storyboards happens a lot more in commercials. I do a lot of commercials, and because it's so specific, and I could see why you go from creative directors and then different agencies, and this is how they envision this, and it's a lot more specific. And I think in commercials, the storyboards is very critical, I would say. And I sometimes try to deviate a little bit, but it can get very stale sometimes. You just shoot what you storyboard. This doesn't allow for rooms, but it works in terms of marketing. But I only storyboard sequences in narratives or in short films or features that requires preparation and technical stuff. A stunt or a long wonder that when you're trying to stitch shots together, then we have to storyboard it, or even do animatics in how long we need to sit on each beat, and just trying to figure it out if it's like a long wonder. Underwater, I always try to storyboard underwater as much as possible, because it takes so much time trying to shoot and trying to communicate with the operator in underwater and all those things. And you're communicating with the group department, because I think or even the electric actually for underwater. So all the underwater stuff, I try to storyboard as much as possible. I don't think there's that luxury as much in short films to storyboards. If anything, just going to a location and talk a lot about what could look like, and take still photos, and then that's it. Yeah.
Okay. Can you speak to the relationship between yourself and the other creative departments during prep? How closely do you prefer to work with the director, production designer, and others? Let's open with Alfonso on this one.
Oh, it's so important. It's like a harmony. I don't think there's such thing as one department is more important than the other because everyone contributes so much. It's yeah, I try to work very closely with the production designer, even whomever is doing the location scout, the location manager is so important to try to be in sync of what we're trying to find in the texture and all those things. And even the sound person, I think sometimes also quite interesting to have those conversations. Even the editor as well, yeah, ahead of time, trying to envision how the editors also interpret the script and figured out the pacing of things. But mostly I work very closely. Yeah, I think probably the closest collaborator in the that I see day to day is probably the production designer and the prop master. I would say those two are the ones that I interact the most in prep, especially in the office. I guess we have the luxury when we're prepping for a movie, we have offices, so they all kind of like right next to each other. And this is already like this is on top of like after lockdown from COVID, and we all have offices, so we get to see those people all the time, and we bounce a lot of ideas. And I love when production designers start taping all their concepts on the hallway, and then you walk past it every day. You start seeing what the production designer is thinking about, or even going to the what the prop master is bringing into it. I sometimes just go in there and just see what they're trying to, what kind of props they're putting together, and that sparks a lot of ideas. Yeah, I would say that that person is probably the closest I collaborate with, those people.
And Andy?
Yeah, I mean, same. Production design is huge. I mean, depending on the script, sometimes you have to work a little bit heavily with the wardrobe department, in terms of changes and in terms of colors, patterns, whatnot. But definitely props master. I think at the beginning, yeah, production designer, the locations department should definitely be there. That's a huge one. If not, a lot of the times, perhaps you or the director are just doing locations, specifically for short films. You have a little bit more room. But for features, definitely, I think if you can get right away on board with the production designer as well as the AD, because the schedule is really going to help you in terms of your cinematography. I know a lot of people talk about cinematography, beautiful images, but it's actually you have to deal with a lot of different departments and scheduling to work it to your advantage, and then the actors availability. And I mean you're dealing with a lot of pieces here in terms of we're talking cinematography, just not what you're giving behind it. When you're behind the camera and actually in the offices, like Alfonso said, like walking past those hallways and you're seeing the production design, you're seeing the cynic painters coming in, the sets are being built, and then you're talking to the AD about like, okay, when can we shoot this? What do we work with that? Working with the director for all of that. And then I would say after that, for me, the process would be like working with my gaffer, working with my key grip, to really specific, okay, what kind of rigs are we going to do for, with grips? Okay, what can we get? What cranes? What are we going to have? The mounts? And then working with my gaffer in terms of like, okay, let's have a look at these wood boards. Let's have a look. Let's break down how we're going to light this. Okay, how long are we going to need? I go back to cinematography. It's just not about lighting. It's like timing, is scheduling. How long do you think it's going to take for us to set up at the beginning of the day? And my biggest thing is, I always want to be in front of the departments, and have the cinematography and everything ready to go. So that'd be my answer to that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think AD, the job of an AD is the hardest job, I would say.
Yeah.
I always find, I think you're right. The building a strong relationship with the AD and knowing what's going on and what's stressful for the AD is very useful.
Yeah.
As somebody who ADs quite often, I really respect that. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about look. What does your decision-making process look like with regards to the look of the film? What dictates your choices for camera, for lensing, and for lighting? I mean, both of you have spoken to budget, but are there other things that kind of like what indicates the way you want to go about choosing those tools? Let's open with Andy for this.
Again, it all comes down for me for the story, working closely with the director. I know it's starting to sound repetitive, but those are really important, dissecting scene for scene what is going to need it. I'll give a good example. If you are seeing some locations and you think, we got to fit 4 or 5 actors in here, perhaps you might want to shoot anamorphic, perhaps you want to shoot wider lenses. So really just kind of seeing the process like from the inside out, going through, budget is a big one, but creatively, like how are we going to creatively capture this? Is this the right camera? I mean, a lot of the times I ask myself, like, is this the right camera for the job, or do I need something more high end, or could I get something more low tech? I think in today's world we have like an abundance of cameras, and I think the story drives the kind of camera that you're going to use. So that's kind of a bit of my process there.
And Alfonso?
Yeah, the look at either, it's to me, the look is always a hypothesis in the beginning of the prep process until we actually start shooting and start seeing dailies. To me, that's when start fully developed, like how everything is falling into place. I like to do a lot of line diagrams just to prepare myself, and the choices of the light dictates in the placement. And then once I do those line diagrams, it really gives me a sense of how long it takes per scene. And then that helps communicate a lot as well, sometimes with the AD in every department. It all comes down to, story is important to me, but it's also, I think, the emotion of every shot and every scene is so important. And I always try to be extra sensitive to what is the technology is doing, or the gears are doing in that scene, and how it's creating that emotion. I think for me, I always find it very hard to create emotion in a shot. Obviously the actors deliver it, the performance delivers it, but then when a shot needs to feel a certain tone to it or a certain thing, and usually comes from maybe trying to ask the production designer and say, maybe we need a bit more of this over there, just to create a lot more, maybe a visual thing on set that evokes some sort of nostalgia or something, and then I'll create the lighting around it, or the practical or something. To me, is always the hardest part is to push how to create a beat or emotion in a shot. Mm-hmm. And sometimes maybe it's just pulling the camera back and not doing anything. Maybe just let this thing unfold, and the look appears and the palette comes to place. So that's something I always challenge myself to be better at constantly. Mm-hmm. And I find cohesively telling a story is also very hard, because the structure of filmmaking is all truncated, and then trying to keep the story fluid as much as possible. And that's another challenge. And I think that dictates the look too. Sometimes how many night times or dusk or all of that tells a story. So it's also a lot about logistics. I find my job nowadays, it's all about management as much as anything, trying to anticipate logistics as much as possible. And that would dictate the look sometimes. And the other thing that I find it very challenging is you don't necessarily shoot the format you get to shoot. And I say that because now with all these different platforms and different deliverables, I always find it very challenging. Like I almost couldn't shoot anamorphic on this landscape feature just because of the deliverables, and we didn't have any large format anamorphic at the time, and we wanted to deliver it, and they wanted a 4K deliverable, but we ended up shooting on that 3.2K. But when you shoot on Alexa, it's a 2K deliverable. Mm-hmm. So they almost didn't allow that, so we had to convince it that we're going to do it in post to up-res it, so we can actually shoot that format. So that sometimes dictates nowadays as well, is what platform they're thinking about delivering it. Is theatrical or is it streaming? If it's streaming, then it opens up different things. So the look these days and the choices of that is dictated almost like in different things now than what you really want to do.
Yeah, and I want to add to Alfonso, because it's been really interesting in my process of like now delivering for network TV, of like what the deliverables are, and like sometimes you know, I do want to sort of change some settings in the camera, or shoot with anamorphic, or, you know, it does kind of tie you into what you're going to shoot and for who you're shooting with. So that was a good point you brought up there. Yeah, definitely.
Definitely something I'd like to touch on is, you know, with regards to, and this isn't a question I have on here, this is just something I'm pulling from what you're talking about with regards to like this new generation of streaming platforms being a predominant ending point for a lot of features and other work. Are you finding that there's a substantial difference between like what you're able to do with that exhibition method versus like theatrical, or even versus network? I mean, let's speak to theatrical versus streaming more so than network, but like, is the bit rate or the resolution limitations, is that something that factors into the decision making you make? Do you avoid blacks as a result? Do you avoid movements? Like where do you guys stand on this?
I mean, that's a
I was like, Andy, I'm gonna let you answer first. It's a big one.
I don't really know. Yeah, I mean, that's I don't know, man. To be honest with you, that's a tough question. Like, it's not really about avoiding. It's just really, I mean, if you're talking about deliverables for network TV, for me personally, just kind of giving them what they want. I mean, there has been a lot of times, I tell you guys, no word of a lie, because I love shooting on the darker side, that I have been told, you know, you need to light the face a little more, you need to bring these up. But I think those are just, I love what I do, and I always want to try and implement the look that I want to give. And sometimes you get away with it and sometimes you don't. But 95% of the time, I'm always pushing, because it's my passion. And I've been doing it for so long that I know now that, yes, the deliverables are this specific thing, but if I can remain within you know, in the sort of range of where I'm still being artistic enough to give myself what I want, you know, out of the project, and say, hey, I'm happy with this look. That's why, you know, for me, I post about the network stuff that I do, whether it's the Hallmark or whether it's, you know, the Lifetime Now or the Oprah Winfrey's, because I'm really happy with the look of those films. And yes, there was a lot of times from QC, I'm sure Alfonso knows all about the QC reports, that they're always saying, you know, hey, you got to like this, or this was a little, or this. But you know, I think there's a fine balance. You know, cinematography has now been, in terms for me, it's become a lot of politics and a lot of great things to learn from the other side of just being a good cinematographer, because I feel there's growth in there, and that's how you get to do bigger projects. Because when you're doing bigger projects, you already know you're a good cinematographer. You can compose great shots, you can make something look beautiful, and you can, you know, help the direction of the film to its edit stages. But can you deal with, you know, network TV, QC, you know, editors, you know, post-production houses telling you this and this? Okay, we need to. So yeah, especially visual effects. When you shoot visual effects for delivery, there's just so many heads in there. You know, it just gets a little bit complicated. So I think, yeah, definitely the challenge there is the politics surrounding all that deliverable. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, it's very democratic now. Like even, yeah, so one of the early conversations now that I find very interesting, not in short films, but mostly on bigger project or features or even series. The first meeting you always have is with distributors or with the platform engineers of how this is all going to come together. You know, they start talking about, you know, HDR or it's going to be a 4K or whatever Ks these days that we're talking about, and the blacks, how things are going to handle the highlights and all those things. So a lot of this conversation gets started even early on now, for me at least. I don't know, is there for everyone? I know Netflix is very serious about this. This one of the first meetings you have like 15 people, and they all ask you how we intend to do this and what is qualified to be the Netflix, you know, parameters of technology or the tech specs and all those things. And I take those into account now and try to fit into what I think the creative is for the film. And yeah, like what Andy said, I think when you have to mature and grow into learning the politics and how to navigate all of that. And I think I used to be a lot more of a purist kind of person when it comes to, I'm creating something artistic and very personal. But I think as I'm grown older, I realized you can't be that arrogant. You have to really open up to everyone trying their best to put eyeballs into what you film and get to see the story. And it becomes so saturated now. There's so many different things that you can watch, and so everyone's trying their best to put eyeballs on those content. Mm-hmm. So I respect all of that as well. And so I take that into account. I listen to what the marketing want to do, and then I was trying to sculpt this piece and add my creativity into it. And it's still like there's still a lot of stuff you can still do creatively. Yeah, like Andy said, I don't think I can push as dark as I want to as well. These days it's hard to do that, especially with different TVs. You don't know how dark it's gonna be, and then it's something that everyone's very scared about. Is how dark we can push it. For short film though, I think there's a lot of freedom there to do a lot of different things, mixed format, or you can do almost anything you want. You can shoot parts of it with an iPhone and stitch together, and still part of the creative choices. So it's really interesting what you can do in short films. Less politics too, compared to the other projects.
Excellent. This is the last question with pre-production. Aside from the obvious answer of like the number of shots is increased, what makes the planning process different between features and shorts? Let's open with Alfonso for this.
I guess the first thing is how many days is budgeted. To me, that's kind of like the big one, and how many pages we're shooting per day. I think that's when everything is started to fall into place. And I try to design stuff that fits to those parameters. I always try to assess what are my parameters, what are the boundaries for each project. And it goes from there in prep, and then I start to see how big the team is going to be, how much of a budget we can afford different things, and then I start to distill down from there, and then plan accordingly. With everything else. Yeah, I don't have a good answer to that, because I feel like with features, it depends also. Features, sometimes I find there's different type of features too. There's the very low budget features, and then there's the 15, 20 million or plus, and then so within that breed of features is very different process, and every short film is also very, very different. So I try to adapt to each project in itself.
And Andy.
Yeah, the planning process between features different to shorts. I think it's got to, again, the growth is in the shorts, which helps you get to the features. So I think for me personally, I try and keep it as much as possible to the same things that I do with the shorts, and then transfer it to the features. Even just like Alfonso mentioned, the number of days. I think in a short film, I might be slightly less in wanting to connect with an AD in terms of the 2-3 day schedule, and then in a feature film, it's really wanting to connect with them. I go back to the specific scheduling factor, because that is how your cinematography is going to be able to sort of showcase in the work that you're doing. Also too, for shorts and features, I would say my planning process for shorts, I'm a little bit more open again to, you could just give me anything, any camera, any lens, and I'm open to that. But for feature films, I really want to be able to get that visual language out with the specific equipment that I need and use, right? So, but relatively, every job is, I'd always thought, this job's going to be the same as the next job, and every job is just completely different. So I think if you're a well-rounded cinematographer who knows the logistics, knows the politics, knows cinematography, you know how to convey the story, you know how to work closely with directors and also actors. That's really important, is working closely with actors. People think that the directors just work closely with actors. No, you work closely with the actor as well. So yeah, that's kind of, yeah, sometimes I do some small pre-production with the actor. You know, if we are rehearsing like a one or a handheld shot, you know, you work closely with the actor. So yeah, but always different for both.
Okay, let's move into production. Let's talk about the average shooting day. How does the average shooting day differ between a short and a feature? And obviously, this is what we'll talk about. This is preferable more so than like your average in terms of like your average across your career. Let's open with Andy for this one.
For me, I would say for a short film, it's really tough. They're both really the same process. They don't really change, but I think for a short film, I would be a little bit more open to fluidity, to things being a little bit more not so rigid. As to, for example, a feature, I would definitely want to come in the morning. You know, I want to block for a while. I think blocking is super important. We don't do it enough in this. You know, I'm always say that, you know, if you block it once, you're not going to shoot it 2-3 times, you know, so you block it correctly. And I love nothing but blocking as a cinematographer. It's really important for me specifically to really know where the actor's going to move from, who's coming in what door, where the lighting is going to play, where am I going to have to light? Maybe I have to light the whole room, for example, because the blocking is going to dictate all of that. So I really like to prepare myself in the morning for the first blocking and to what's up. I like to work not in the past or not in the present. So what I mean is like, okay, blocking's here for this scene. I know what I need to do for the next scenes, but let's not to worry about those scenes. I need to be fully immersed in every specific scene that I'm doing. In terms of, and then throughout my day, I kind of allow blocking to be a little bit different, or you know, the shot list is kind of being skewed a little bit, you know, something delayed us in the timing and whatnot, but really working closely with, again, with the key grip and the gaffer to kind of keep molding me to making sure that we're continuously getting the continuity of the lighting, because that's another thing, you know, it's like you can prep yourself for an average day, you know, for 2-3 days for a short, but then, you know, like when you're doing 30 days on a feature film or you're doing 3 weeks, you know, you got to be able to keep that same sort of continuity. So every day kind of becomes the same, but allowing it to kind of flow.
And Alfonso?
Yeah, to me, I don't think there's an average day. I've shot a short film that's 13 days, and it's just luxury, you know, and I've shot short films that's 1 day or 3 days, and depending on the page count, I think I personally prefer on that 13-day shoot on a short film, we're doing 3-4 pages a day, and it's also because it's quite vast, the concept that they want to do, so that varies. And yeah, I find features anything below 23 days is very stressful, because you don't really have a lot of room for different things. On an average, you know, let's say the feature script has like 90 to like 100 pages. 23 days, it's not a lot of days. I find I prefer it more. And then yeah, I think the page count per day to me is so important, because that would dictate how much time we spend blocking, as Andy said. You know, I think Andy you know, talked about something very important in production, which is blocking. You want to allocate as much time for blocking, and at the same time getting the actors to hear their suggestions or something, and maneuver the space. We can prep as much as we want, but it's really on that blocking, on that moment, that everyone brings the reality into what we're actually dealing with. And you know, the weather that situate on that moment, or things, different variables in that moment. You know, a generator's down, and you know, so many things happens, and then that's when you take advantage of the present. And I always like more time in blocking. And like you said, like Andy said, you know, when you have a good blocking, you don't have to shoot the scene so many different times, and it just flows. And And I think that's what I try to protect as much as possible whenever we're trying to push for days or where we allocate more time. I always try and protect blocking. More than anything, I would say. And also I find on some features, it depends on the either it's a studio or something, but there is a demand for a type of look. And if it's like a very specific look that they're going for, like a more polished and more audience, more accessible to audiences, usually that means you really need to do a lot more, cranes and techno cranes and you don't want the indie look, so you have to stabilize almost everything, and so that adds more time to the shooting process. So that's when I usually ask for more days, as opposed to maybe an indie feature where things are a lot more naturalistic and the feeling doesn't have to be as polished, and usually to me it doesn't require as much crew or technical abilities to achieve some of those shots.
I definitely think talking about blocking is a really important element that as filmmakers outside of the cinematography world, we really don't necessarily understand all the time exactly how helpful that is for the cinematography. We had a mantra that was drilled into us in film school, which was block, light, rehearse, shoot. That you should not be leaving that pattern. That you need to block all the time. You need to make sure you're going through all of those steps. So I want to talk a little bit about rehearsal versus blocking. We live in an era right now where we can shoot more shots because of digital than we used to be able to. And have you found that as a result, rehearsal has kind of taken a back seat? Is that something you've tried to bring more into your work? Have you received any pushback on that? Let's open with Andy for this.
Yeah, that's a good question. Definitely rehearsing. I see the difference now between features and network TV land. I find we rehearse more in features because there's more care and there's more love of what you're doing. And I'm not saying that, I do everything regardless of what I'm doing, for the love and the passion. And I love nothing but being immersed in the lighting and the shots, but definitely does. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Can you repeat that again one more time?
With the move to digital and like the ability to just shoot more and more and more.
Thank you, guys.
How is rehearsal like? How does rehearsal exist in this world now?
Absolutely, yeah. So what I was getting to is, I tend to rehearse a lot in feature land or short films as well, just because I want to make sure that I'm covering myself as to understand, is this the best way that we are covering this scene? Like, I know we wrote it down in a shot list, but when you're rehearsing, I'm actually thinking about how can I elevate this scene? How can I make the scene better than what we talked about on screen? Maybe maybe I need to get down here. And when we're rehearsing, actually, I'm walking through the set a lot. And a lot of actually, it's funny because a lot of people think that I'm angry because I put my hands behind my back and I walk really slowly. But it's none of that. It's because I'm actually thinking about how can I elevate this particular shot or this scene, or where is the lighting going to come from, or how do I bounce that light coming from the window to an actor that's now over there, and now the direction of the light is completely different. So I think it's really interesting that process of rehearsal, and then transferring that to a quicker, faster pace. Like Alfonso said, 23 days. Well, in network TV, we're doing, 16, 15 days, and you're doing 10 pages a day, which is a different type of way, right? I enjoy both of them. One is really challenging. The other one's really creative, but at the end, they're both creative. And we don't get as much rehearsal. So for me, in network TV, it's more about, I know I'm going to get to probably see it once. And how can I creatively now, with the tools that I'm given, be able to cover this scene with some sort of feeling, with a meaning to that the audience is going to feel, instead of just making it so dry. And I think that's kind of what I'm implementing in these, what I like to think I'm implementing in a lot of these MOWs is, I grew up in South America. I never forget that. Raised in the Middle East. Let's bring those flavors. I find that really important, that I'm, even though I'm just a cinematographer, that I'm bringing in my cultural side of things to what I'm doing. So.
And Alfonso?
Yeah, I think it depends on the director. Some directors don't like rehearsal as much. They like things to, happen in camera as naturalistic as possible, and some directors do prefer. But it's very rare now that directors prefer rehearsal. Usually I have to ask for it too, and I always have to I'll break it down in the script, and then I kind of try to anticipate which scenes I would need some rehearsal just to see how things are feeling on the day with the actors. What I do ask a lot after blocking is a camera rehearsal, at least of some sort, just to rough things in a little bit more. And having a rehearsal, it's really enhancing communication, because I find there's so many miscommunication sometimes, even between director and DP, or with my crew, of what the scene was, and then when there's disconnect, at some point in any department, it creates a lot of chaos. So I always ask for a rehearsal on key moments or things that needs clarity, a little bit more clarity, and then everyone, it's more in sync with that. I love rehearsal, to be honest. It's such a beautiful thing. It's part of, I think, the old way of filmmaking. There's so much rehearsal, and you get a lot more quality, perhaps, than trying to shoot more and figure out in the edit. And when you do rehearse a bit more, I think you're protecting the edit a little bit more. You're protecting what you're actually shooting. The ratio of good stuff versus bad stuff, it's better, and I always try to protect that as much as I can as well. It's the ratio of, not everything we shoot, at least, and to me, not everything I shoot is great. So my ratio, it fluctuates.
Absolutely.
There's some stuff where I'm like, oh yeah, I got some good stuff, and then the rest of it, I don't know. So you want to even out the ratio.
Yeah.
Even like in basketball, Stephen Curry, is the best 3-point shooter, but he is like a 44% 3-pointers. That means 60. My math is wrong, but it means 60% of the time he fails. He's 40% he makes it. So I find very similarly with my work. There's a ratio to it. It's never 100%. So I try to protect the good stuff as much as possible, and more ratio on that, and then hide the bad stuff.
Alfonso, the Stephen Curry of cinematography.
For the 3-pointer, I love it, man.
It's interesting that you guys seem to, put a strong differentiation between rehearsal and camera rehearsal. Can you speak a little bit to the differences between those two types of rehearsals, and kind of what you get from those rehearsals differently?
I think.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, for me, I think a camera rehearsal sometimes is really important when you have longer scenes, when you're doing dolly moves, when you're doing cranes, maybe Steadicam, Mobi, any kind of those gimbals. Definitely, I love nothing more than to rehearse. And trust me, 90% of the time, I'm asking for 4 to 5 rehearsals if I could try to get it. And it's not because, I'm a diva or anything like that. Again, I just go back to, because every time I'm rehearsing, I'm like, ooh, I can do this better. Oh, I see this opening here. Or, oh, there's a better way of doing this. It's just, it's really a process for me of self-discovery, to be honest, when I'm rehearsing, and I'm just allowing to taking all that in, because when you actually get down to shooting the shot after having some great rehearsal, specifically camera rehearsal, I just feel like the team's ready. We're ready to go into battle. Everybody's aware. Everybody knows, we're well coordinated. We're an oiled machine. And yes, again, you might do the best rehearsals, and then I've had times where you're like, oh man, I thought we did it better in the rehearsal. But it just, I think it's just it's kind of a bit of a dance, where camera rehearsal it's a bit of a dance. I always think of I like to play music now on set between setups. That's become my big thing in like this network TVs and anything I do, because I feel like, what we're doing is a bit of a dance. And when you're doing the camera rehearsal, either with a second team, a lot of the times you won't get, perhaps you could do it with first team for a little bit, but then second team stays there for a while because they need to go, actors need to do finals and whatnot. And then you can just do it over and over again. And sometimes I just keep telling second team to do it again and again until the actors come back. And then we're warmed up, we're ready to go, and you get some of the best stuff. Yeah.
And Alfonso?
I think rehearsal in general to me is just to feel the energy with the actor and just kind of what the beat of the scene is, just to feel it out overall. And then camera rehearsal, depending on the technicality. I always ask for camera rehearsal with techno crane, especially. It's complicated, or long runners, or runners that we need to stitch together later on for pacing and things. So usually I ask for camera rehearsal mostly just to iron out certain things. But like Andy said, I sometimes don't want to ask for camera rehearsal, because if the actors are ready and everything is good, you don't want to over rehearse either, because once you over rehearse, then things feels very contrived, and you don't want things feeling very contrived. At least the type of cinema that I like to watch, it feels like almost as if people behaves the way they behave in reality as in movies, and then you don't want to make feel too contrived. So that's the magic. I think that's the thing you're always trying to find. The dance is what's that sweet spot between rehearsal and technical and all of that stuff. I find short films too, it's beneficial to keep in mind all those things in short films. Some short films are very complicated to do.
Yeah.
We were, I have an anecdote about this. We were doing a long form web series over the summer, and day one, I get reports from the producers. The focus is soft. They're all really worried about the focus being too soft. So I go look at the script notes. We're doing 5-6 takes. We're over by an hour. Go to the DP. I ask, are we doing rehearsals? No, we're not doing rehearsals. It's like, well, can we do 2 or 3 rehearsals and shoot 1 or 2 takes instead of doing 5 takes and no rehearsals? Day 2, no soft focus. Every shot's a circle take. I think that it's that kind of discipline is something we don't really talk about too often in the indie world, and something we don't necessarily know intrinsically because we're rushing through. We're able to shoot all the takes. In film land, you got 1 or 2 takes, that's money. You got 4 or 5 takes, that's money you don't have to spend. So I do find that to be an interesting balance that we have in the world now.
Well, just to add to that as well, I think a lot of the times now, people who work on short films, they might not be the most experienced crew as well. And it's a great platform for everybody to grow, and especially focus pullers or anybody. So it requires a bit more time. And by adding a little bit more patience and maybe a bit of camera rehearsal, it increases their confidence, or because they're testing the waters if they want to spend their life in this field. And in filmmaking, it's a very, I would say, tough career, because it's so many different long hours and all these things. And a lot of times I find people who especially crew wise ends up working on short films, they want to know if that's their passion, and you don't want to kill their passion by reinforcing the same type of tension and stuff, I guess, as feature films. In short films, I was treated a little bit more, as much as I can, more relaxed, and keep their opportunity to learn.
How do you feel about the term shoot on rehearsal?
Shoot the rehearsal.
Shoot the rehearsal. Roll the rehearsal. Is that something that you're ambivalent about, or that angers you?
For me, it all depends. If it's coming down to the end of the day and they don't want to pay overtime and you need to try and get things in the can, I think, shoot the rehearsal. And there is beauty sometimes in shooting the rehearsal, because there could be magic in anything you do. I never shy away from it, but mainly I've only thankfully shooting rehearsals when we're, again, in dire straits and, we have, a couple more pages to go or whatnot, or the weather, or, some sort of condition that has happened. Oh, we got to shoot the rehearsal. Go, 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 go. But I do sometimes find that a lot of mistakes are made in shooting the rehearsal, which we should have just rehearsed it anyways. So at times I'm like, well, we should have just rehearsed it another time without shooting it, and we wouldn't have to. So yeah, I think there's pros and cons to it for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a very similar answer as Andy. I don't like the phrase in general because if you shoot it, then it's not a rehearsal. So it's one of those things where I hate the phrase in general. I think it really depends on the director and the idea as well. So I think sometimes they work together to figure out their process. And sometimes shooting the rehearsal just creates a lot more confusion and everyone trying to figure it out, and then creates more data, and then the IT and someone who's doing that is just more work, and it's a whole pipeline, and you don't want to, I feel bad for those transcoders because they have to transcode stuff that they shouldn't have to, or so it's just a discipline and a dance and respecting everybody's, someone's gonna have to do the transcoding, right? So and it's never just, oh, I'm the director, I'm just gonna shoot everything. It's never like that. It should be thought about, whomever's dealing with that footage later on as well.
On the note of discipline, something you kind of hear from the old guard is that the older days of shooting on film, gave you those natural breaks when you had to change mags or reels, and now that we have the ability to shoot more and more content, or switching a mag is as simple as just swapping the card for 2 seconds. Do you find that something is lost in that changeover, in this new era? Have you found that in your own work? Is that something that you found a way around? This is kind of a looser question, but is this something you guys can speak to? Let's open with Alfonso on this one.
I really like the discipline of shooting film in that sense. So I think that one of the things that I've been thinking a lot lately is discipline on set, or how people now, the crew, behaves on set. And I feel like there's a lot of distraction now on set, and not everyone's as focused in trying to achieve something. And I find that, I went to film school in like 2004. There was 1080p was just coming in, and everyone was like, wow, like this thing shoots 1080p. So I remember, like, and digital for me was like, I didn't understand at first, and then but shooting film was something that you have to know what you want and shoot it, and unless you have a lot of stock, and then you definitely shoot more. But the idea of people focusing on things, on set, because it's just like there's not many monitors, and everyone has to be extra pay a lot more attention to what's happening there on set, or just using our brain a lot more, trying to remember things, and so that engages us more to focus more on set as well. And even for me, I'll make sure I'm not slacking off either. I'll meter a few things here and there, or I'll just look at things more carefully, and so it all adds to that idea of being more present, and that's beautiful. And the one thing that I find now, that people who didn't come from that background, they just take a glance at a monitor, like like how many seconds, 10 seconds, okay, all right, and then but they're not really present. There's one thing is when you stare at something, when you look at something, it's two different things. So that's the one thing I always try to instill now on set is how to create the crew and everyone to be more present versus then just doing something. So yeah.
Andy?
Yeah, for me, I love, again, Alfonso said it best, the discipline of film. I think for me personally, the minute that camera starts rolling and you can hear the reel going, people are just so immersed because it's so iconic and very historic. They're very immersed in what's happening, and the fact that before they didn't have the tabs in order for you to be able to view it, but now luckily they do. Only the operator was looking through there, so it made everybody really want to be intrigued and really connected with what's happening with the actors. Digital definitely has changed the world of that. Now, everybody's on their iPhones looking at the image, and it's not really being aware and like you said, mindful about what's actually happening on set. A lot of the times, my focus pullers just spend so much time like this, and I'm like, well, why don't you just come up to here and like watch the actor, like, kind of the old school way of them, bring the tape measure, measure the distance, if this is a song and dance, maybe that he's moving 10 feet, coming back to 7 feet, mark that. Now in the new technology, you have the vibration that indicates that you're in and out of focus and whatnot. But yeah, definitely it's tougher now to keep people engaged. Cell phones play a huge part of that on set. My last few short films have been shot on film, and I find that the minute you tell people that you're shooting on film, they're just that much more in love with the project, right? Because they're like, okay, we're doing something that's meaningful, that's going to be captured. I think when you capture something in the emotion, and that when you shoot the film, and the fact that I can actually, even in my background, I have my films, it's like, there's just beauty to that. There is respect. I think we've kind of, the fact that everybody now can shoot anything everywhere in YouTube, and anybody's a filmmaker or whatnot. I love that, and it's helped the industry a lot. But we've sort of lost this respect to what the true art form is. And even myself, who works on the really hardcore indies and the very artistic projects that I'm directing, and just instrumentally kind of trying to move something forward, to working to the networks, is, yeah, we've sort of lost a bit of touch in what we're doing, I think.
So what do you guys do in your process to kind of bring that back in when you're shooting digital? Is that something you've put a lot of effort into considering, or is that something you're still kind of developing? Open discussion, if anybody has a point.
I'm still developing it. My next couple projects going to be shot on 16 and 35, and I think by doing that and bringing crews that I enjoy working with, that kind of instill a bit more of what it feels like to be more present. And I think it's an ongoing thing. I mean, I'm not against the look of digital and things like that. It's more, I'm against the process of how people interact on set. So it's an ongoing thing I'm trying to figure it out. And maybe shooting more in film, that would instill that.
Yeah, I think definitely going back to shooting more film. I mean, my next short will be on film. I definitely think that the older I get, the more calm I sort of become, and the more I want to revert back. As maybe, Abby, you know me, I'm not huge in technology. I don't, I respect and envy the cinematographers that are really huge into the technology base. But for me, cinematography is not all about technology. It's like, do you have an eye? Like, you can buy the most expensive cameras, have the best gear, but if you don't have the eye, if you don't understand story, if you don't know how to work with your director and the whole crew, it's going to be very tough. And I know that a lot of people now can put beautiful images and put a demo reel and everything looks good. But, I think is reverting back to its simplicity of filmmaking. And that's what I think where my career is going to be.
So what kind of advice can you give to indie or, crews that don't have the budgets for film and film stock and film development laboratory costs? What advice can you give them in terms of adjusting their process to kind of like bring a lot of that kind of discipline or those benefits from that discipline into the work that they do? Let's open with Andy on that one.
I think for one, maybe like the use of cell phones on set would be a huge one for me, to be more present. When we're rolling, I don't know. I mean, I find so many people are whispering or they're talking, and I'm like, guys, we're rolling. So just, I think, kind of going back to the way I was taught film, it's like more the minute we're on set, we're here to do a job. We're friends, but we're also, it's show business. Right. So I think when you land on set, we're here to do a job. It is fine to talk and to, okay, but I just find so many people now just talk about random things, or they're not really paying attention, or you're calling a certain department and we're like, where's the art department? Or like, where's props? Like, why are we not here together? I think I played a lot of sports when I was young, and I still do. I think the sort of system of like sportsmanship and being on a team is kind of being broken because a lot of us work on a lot of different things, and we work with different crews, but if we had some sort of sportsmanship, some sort of team goal, I think the goal too is to kind of align ourselves together, and not everybody in the crew is going to come together with that same goal. So that's, yeah.
Alfonso?
Everything that you said, basically, I agree. I think one thing that can add to it is maybe actually having pre-production meetings that engages everyone. And it's hard for people to be present if they don't care. So by having a lot more pre-production or even conversation, and that their ideas matter, just the whole thing is creating synergy and getting them. I know it's harder these days to have pre-production, but with everyone, I think is, the more we can do, the more everyone's gonna be present and care about it. And when they care about something, they tend to be more active. And so I think that's one thing I would add to what Andy said.
I'll give a great example, and I'm not going to name any names, and I sometimes still hire these people, but there's been multiple times when I'm on, because I operate everything that I do as well as cinematography. I'm not a huge Video Village cinematographer. I like to be really in it, so I operate all the time. But I always look back, and like half my guys are on their cell phones, and I'm like, guys, like, I need you here now. Like, I hired you for a job. And I think what's being lost is that, like, my reputation is also on the line because I brought this crew in. I mean, unless the production manager got your crew or whatnot, but still, like, 90% of the times you're bringing in your own crew, And so when I catch, some of my core team doing that, I need to go back to the truck and really, have a sit down with them. And that's another thing that we forget about what cinematographers do. It's like when different departments, there's a lot of people management, and you really have to know relationships, and you really need to know how to talk mindfully to people. I know that there's a lot of cinematographers out there that yell and they get angry. I'm not that style. I like to talk like how I would like to be talked to. But yes, it is definitely been happening more and more that I see just people out of tune, and I'm like, you're here for me. Let's do this, man. When you go home, you can do whatever you want, but I need you here now. So yeah, it's been happening more and more, I would say.
Let's talk about the difference between lighting with regards to film versus digital. What experiences have you found in that difference? How has your process shifted across one or the other? And especially with like the rise of LEDs, something that hasn't traditionally been around during the film generation. How have you found that factored in and changed that process as well? Let's open this one with Alfonso.
I love LED technology. I think it gives me precise exposure that I want, and even shifting from daylight to tungsten very quickly. I like that. I still like the same. I don't think I've changed much, to be honest. Maybe because my approach is I don't like the person per se. I like as much as possible the environment around me, and then I'll hone in onto the person. But I don't think it's changed that much. If anything, I don't use as much. I still prefer HMIs a lot more, like something that's burning something that feels to me is more naturalistic than for LEDs for as a replacement for HMI. I still enjoy HMIs, but it also depends on the project. I'm not gonna try to like tell if it's a short film, I'm not gonna say, hey, we need to get generators because I want to power all these HMIs. Then I'll fluctuate to what the production is. So one thing that I think has changed with me as a cinematographer over the years from shooting film and digital, I'm definitely a lot more flexible now. Like I don't try to impose rigorous mentality to the project. Oh, you can afford this, okay, well, let's shift around, let's figure this out, and let's try to do this, because maybe I'm a lot more comfortable now experimenting with things versus trying to emulate things very precisely. And also maybe because there's so many ways to do things now, and I embrace that. I don't like the idea of, oh, with a window we have to add an HMI outside. I'm not gonna do that. As maybe I just embrace what the day of, shoot it at 3 or 4 o'clock, and it's nice. And so I embrace that a lot more than lighting it sometimes. And so it depends on the budget and what the story is and the tone of the film is. So, but I don't think it's shifted that much from shooting film with digital.
Sometimes Mother Nature is the best gaffer.
Yeah.
Andy, can you speak to this as well?
Yeah, for sure. I like Alfonso. I don't think my process changes. I'm a stiffler for metering, and sometimes people still say, well, why are you metering digital? And I love my spot meter. I love my incident meter. You see me right next to the camera. I'll spot almost every single wall, every single thing that I can. And it's not that I want to be super specific, because I need also to allow the lighting to be natural looking, right? But I do want to know what that exposure is at. I do want to know that perhaps I'm not under an error, I want to know that there's still some room there, even for post-production, in order to give them some room for color grading. So I think metering for me has never changed. Again, like I said, I'm a stiffler for my meter. The minute my battery dies on that meter, I'm like, guys, I need a battery right now. And that's what I do with every scene. Every scene, regardless, even if we move on and I've metered it already, I'll meter it again just for the close-up, just to really know that I'm shooting this at whatever the stop that I'm using it, right? And what is my background pulling at? Specifically too, I found like I'm a lot more, it's more practice for me now in the network TV side, because I'm dialing in the look. If my actor, for example, is at a 5.6, and I'm with an ND3, okay, my background, I'm like, well, I don't want to be my background brighter, but sometimes it's like, oh, just look at the false color, or just look at the histogram. Again, technology for me, just give me a light meter, and that's all I really need. I don't want to look at a histogram. I don't want to look at, I think for me, the way I see light falling onto the structure, onto the actor, and I get a specific reading, I'm now secure that I know what the exposure is going to be on that camera, or, how many NDs I'm going to be using for exterior or interior or night shoots. And the way now for me for film, I'm a little bit more free. I do spot definitely just to get exposure, but film is a lot more forgiving, I find, and so I kind of just I like to just shoot it more raw, like Alfonso said, like the lighting's coming, you don't need that, HMI coming through. Another thing that I want to specify too is that my background, I did some years of gripping in the industry as potentially.
I will say you're a wizard with grip tech.
Yeah, and I think a lot of things too that we forget is that, like, yes, you could do the lighting, but I'm really big for my cinematography into gripping. So a lot of negative, adding that negative fill, the negative bounce. How could I get a light in here without having to actually light, using bounces, mirror boards, phase savers? I mean, sometimes it's like a grip jungle in there, but I try to manipulate that without having to use the lighting. So
yeah, that's so true. Like we always think about cinematography to light something, but it's actually a lot of time it's subtracting something. It's just shaping it, and so true. Like very often, I think my goal one day is actually not use a single light and just shape it with like just taking away. That would be an interesting experiment. I haven't done that, but I always think about maybe there will be one day on one project I'll just do that.
I'll do that project with you, Alfonso. I'll gladly do that. That sounds amazing. And that speaks to what Andy was saying about the most important light is the one you turn off. Like that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's fascinating to find out. Do you find? I mean, you mentioned that film is more forgiving. Do you find that it's like film is thirstier than digital, or is digital thirstier than film in terms of like volume of light?
I guess it depends on the stock. I mean, how fast that stock is. Yeah, I mean, still, like you can't really shoot that high of this you can, I think, just 500, and I think you need a bit more lighting. I know you're shooting a lot of exterior, but
yeah, it also depends on the type of project. Like if it's something a little more gritty, I perhaps won't worry too much about what the exposure is going to be. But definitely, if I'm shooting something more, like I shot a short on 35 a couple of years ago, and it was more clinical. It took place in a clinic and in a hospital. So I was pumping a lot of light. I mean, I was shooting at around 5-6, to really capture the details and to really make it. So I think it depends on the project, on how you really light for film.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I guess the last question I'll ask for film in the production stage is, and maybe it's not film in general, it's more color. Black and white versus color. I know that, Andy, you've shot El Color Negro in black and white. Was that actually shot in black and white, or was that was converted?
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the process like when you're? Did you go into that knowing you wanted to shoot black and white, or did you go into that like deciding after the fact in post that you wanted it to be black and white?
It was kind of half and half, but I just make sure that my metering, again, I just go back to metering, that the ratios are correct, because when you're color correcting, that's going to be super important, that you're not mudding anything out or you're not blowing anything out. So again, I just if it's a great way to practice is just take your meter and just go outside it. I know, Alfonso, you do a lot of photography as well yourself, which I see.
Amazing photography.
I know, which I see on your Instagram. So I would encourage people to really go out there and get a little digital, a small film camera and meter yourself and constantly practice, because I think now for me, it just comes a little bit more natural because I've been at it for almost 20 years. So I kind of also by eye sometimes, maybe Alfonso, you get this too, but by eye, you can kind of tell what ratios you were shooting. But definitely I thought about coloring in black and white, but I could also keep it in color, but I shot it more to be able to color to black and white.
And Alfonso, have you had a chance to shoot anything that's been black and white?
Yeah, I think my first thing I ever shot in my life was black and white on a Bolex. I like it. It's very interesting, and I like to see the world almost in black and white contrast, because like Andy, I meter everything as well. I don't know how to light with false color. I don't know why. I don't see that.
It doesn't make sense to me either.
Doesn't make sense to me. I don't see the dimensions. For me, it's the stops, and then I start seeing the dimension of the image, and the ratios. I'm very particular about keeping the ratio consistent throughout on the wide or in the close-ups or throughout the film. I like to keep that contrast as much as possible, because I find it's really hard to do contrast in the gray, especially in the face. You have to do so much more work to get that right. I prefer shooting these days whatever's best for the project, to be honest. Like, I don't really have one inclination. I like black and white photography. I like color. I like something maybe different. My next project, I want to experiment. We're going to do hand processing black and white in our bathtubs and try to create something and just experiment with it. I think it's very interesting. And yeah, like I think the one thing I'm noticing as I evolved is to experiment. I think that's the fun part of everything. It's no one way of doing it anymore, and I get more excited when I try to make mistakes in a way that works well. So yeah, I like black and white if it fits the project and the story, and I like color if it fits to it.
Mm-hmm. I lied. I have one more film question. Are we just living in a Vision 3 world, or are there other film stocks that you have access to out there? Is there anything made other than Kodak?
I haven't used that. I just use Kodak.
Yeah, everything else died basically. Unless you're in still photography, you have maybe a bit more brands, but I think for film,
yeah,
just Kodak. Fuji died a long time ago.
Is Vision 3 good enough? Is it like, I personally love like the 5219 stock. I think it's the best looking like low light stock I've ever seen. What do you like? How do you guys feel about like what's available to you? Are you lamenting an era where there were more options, or do you feel like you get enough out of that range?
I think personally, I mean, coming back into film, I can't say that, in between, 2010, I think when Reds became super hot around that time, and 2015, or even 2017, I didn't touch film at all because digital was so hot in the market. It's just been recently. But I mean, it all depends on the project. For me, I have used that stock for every shoot I've done. For me, also depends on the budget and how much you can afford in terms of stock. That's a huge one because, as we know, 400 feet or 1,000 feet is going to cost you the same thing as a foot. It's $1 a minute kind of thing, right? So it all depends what the budget is, but yeah, I really just only use that stock. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that's the finest stock you can get for the 219 Vision 3. Yeah, I don't particularly, I'm not nostalgic about the different film stock. I think if it fits right for the story, then I'll go for it. If anything, these days, I'm also trying to take up the reason why I take a lot of photography is I'm trying to experiment with what I can do in still photography and bring it to film, because it's easier. You're dealing with one frame and you're trying to do different things. So I've used a lot of expired film that I have and experiment with it, which a lot of times the colors are way off and it doesn't look very good. So yeah, that's part of the experimentation in photography. So I say, expired film still works, on anything. So.
Can you shoot stills with Vision 3? Like, can you buy a reel and cut it up into your own smaller rolls, or is that?
No, I don't think you can do that. I think you can buy a different film stock and try to emulate it digitally. That's something I've done. I take film photography, and then I'll use that, and I was like, oh, it'd be great for this project. Then at least it's coming from a reference. Then I'll do that.
Right.
But I don't think you can use Vision 3 as a. Maybe you can do one frame. Yeah, if you have the stopper, you do one frame.
Because it's the same film theoretically, right? Like there's no 35 mil, same.
The mechanics, the perfs. You have to think about the different perfs.
I gotta look this up. The question I wanted to ask to close out production has to do, and I think I have a partial answer from you guys on this, but how important is having a DIT on set? We're talking about digital again, not a DMT. We're talking about a DIT in this case, so somebody who has the ability to do some color on set. And how does that impact your process? Let's open with Andy for this one.
Well, that is budgetary, and I fight with productions a lot of the times, and they don't really see the need to have a DIT on set, so it's pretty tough. But the times that I've won my fights with production to get DITs, I think it's fairly important, especially for a bit of the longer form. In terms of seeing stills right away and seeing continuity, that's a big one for me. If you're bouncing around from scene to scene, or you have to come back to shoot a different kind of scene, it's really important to have the DIT there and to be able to say, hey, I need to see this specific scene, but also to keep the look, what you're trying to do. Perhaps you can add different LUTs, that he can put into, so you're kind of viewing different looks. I tend to not show the producers those because those are my personals, and they're like, what? Why does it look like this? And I'm like, no. We're just messing around. So I try not to do it like when we're actually on set, so just offset. But I enjoy having a DIT there. I think it provides a bit of a safety net for me. They're able to help me out right away on how my contrast is looking, what my blacks are, what my highlights are, and also sometimes some of the DITs that I know perhaps put a little bit of the scene together, and do a bit of the color that helps me kind of reference what I want to get to when we ship it off to the colorist. And also too, you get the references way quicker from a DIT. So instead of waiting for them to go to headquarters, and then you'll get them the next day on the dailies, he can just kind of upload it to you. You just bring your own little thumbstick and whatnot, or however. But yeah, a lot of advantages. But I will say this: a lot of jobs too, production, just like they don't want to pay for it, so we can't have a DIT on set.
Mm-hmm. And Alfonso?
I like the DIT on set, depending on the project. Short film, I find it harder, but also in short film, I usually don't need one. On the last feature shot on this landscape studio project, I had a DIT. It was very good because we also could see some of the things I could push live. So we're able to do a lot of that stuff as well, and just seeing what we can do. And it's very often also what is useful if we're losing the light, and if we can do we have to make a decision, do we have to reshoot that scene again or not, and then or can we do it in a grade? And so my idea could quickly do a bit of push the look a little bit and see how it's looking, and then we can make a decision. Okay, we don't need to go back to shoot that scene again. So it's beneficial in that way. And funny enough, so this is actually very interesting that I found out through working that Netflix project. So not to name drop, but that was a project that was executive produced by David Fincher, and so he does not have a DIT on set. So he told us not to use a DIT. He's against using a DIT.
Wow.
So there's no DIT on his sets.
That's one of the most surprising facts I've ever heard.
Is it a good reasoning, or is it just...
So we had a meeting about that, and
that seems ludicrous.
Our director and editor was very nervous about that. So at least we have to have a DMT on set, right? So to process the data. So we didn't end up having a DMT, but he's against, like, there's no, even if we were to list a DIT on it, and if he sees it, then he's gonna go angry. So the way he does it is he gets, maybe because he shoots in red, but also every cartridge that gets out of the camera goes directly to his facility. So they offloads it at his, I guess, post-production office. So his idea is he doesn't like to fiddle with the look or anything on set. The set is really to shoot what to get, and then you go into post, and then that's when you dissect things. But he doesn't want to see anything dissected. So for us, we were actually imposed not to have a DIT on set.
Wow.
So
That's very interesting.
Respect that. The reason why I respect that is because we're talking back to the discipline, the way they shot films during film. Like, there's no DIT, it's like, and I do kind of respect that. I do respect that. It is kind of like, I love technology and it's added way more jobs for a lot of people, but sometimes stripping away a lot of that is nice too.
Mm-hmm. I definitely wanted to speak to this earlier, and it's interesting that I can touch on it now. But like, there's an older concept about like the camera is a black box that only the DP knows what is going to come out of it at the end of the process. So when you used to send your reels off to the lab, you were doing the notes to the lab, you were doing all of that stuff. Nobody else gets to see that before it goes, and they're only going to see it when it's done, and you have that complete control over it. And I'd heard from a lot of producers when DIT started becoming the norm on set, from a lot of cinematographers, when the DITs became the norm on set, that they would lose some control over that by nature of having a colorist essentially there that the producer can see and talk to, and that was like an extra voice in the process that that just stripped away a little bit of the control that they have. Do you find that's, I mean, that kind of reads to me like where Fincher kind of developed that from? But do you have anything to speak to that?
Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
I'm just gonna say, and just kind of touching base on the manipulation of the image. You could be shooting, and you absolutely have a good point. A lot of the times now, the DITs are close to Video Village. If not, the DIT monitors are Video Village.
That's my favorite.
Oh my God, no, why? So while you're setting up, while you're shooting, whatnot, it is sometimes, being manipulated by one of the producers, executive producers coming over perhaps to the DIT and saying, hey, what if you did, or the DIT's kind of just mucking around and, maybe trying a look that he thinks, works for the project. And yeah, if a producer sees that, it could be, again, I just go back to my own personal experience that I've gotten like, oh, why does it look like that? And I'm like, no, we're just tweaking. This is not the final look, So yeah, it's advantages and disadvantages, I guess.
The one thing I did do sometime is, because I also operate a lot, and I don't know what B camera is doing or matching the exposure sometimes. So I would set it on my end, and I'll get the IT to match the V cam because I'm also operating. So in those regards, really good DITs can really match the exposure for me or for the B camera, or even when I'm doing something else handheld and we just didn't have time to do anything, and I need just to pop it in and grab a moment. So I'll get my DIT to dial the exposure. Like I'll say this scene we're shooting at 2.8, then he would know okay 2.8, and he'll if I didn't add an ND, and he would just call it out. Okay, let's drop an ND in there because it's a little too high. So you can work like that as well, but I rarely do that. I only do it sometime. I still prefer lighting with my meter, and I still feel like it's faster than trying to like get all this conversation going and what ND and all those things. So I just put it in and light it, and even like I know already like kind of what the stop is and what lighting we need roughly already, even before the camera goes up. Sometimes I just light everything already, and then you put the camera and it's ready to go. So sometimes you have to wait for the camera to go up, and then everyone start to do those things. And I find it like that's just wasteful time. And so I still find when you light with the light meter is way quicker. So I don't know if just going back to that I guess question. It depends on how the workflow is for this comfort for anyone. It's if it makes the work better and makes everybody feel better, then I think that's the best workflow.
Yeah. So my takeaways so far are more prep. Rehearsals are good, as many as possible sometimes, and a DIT is good except when it's not. Which is great advice to take away. I think that in indie, we don't get to use DITs as DITs too often. I know that the times when I've had the ability to have a DIT on set that has been that the DP can use like a colorist, that it has enhanced our workflow significantly. But at the same time, like all too often, I've been the DIT and a DMT on a laptop somewhere, just copying it to 2 hard drives, and there's not much more you can accommodate. So it's interesting to be able to understand kind of like the way that the DIT affects that workflow and how they make the DP's process simpler. We had on my last major short, we had a gaffer and a key grip who were both DPs themselves, and were lighting off of the spectroscopes and the histograms on the DIT cart, and like it made the experience for everybody easier because they didn't. Yeah, they have their meters, they have their that, but they can also go in and just dial those little things, see what it actually looks like, and sometimes that's better, sometimes it's not. We live in a weird world where this stuff has only been around for so long.
Yeah, definitely. I embrace technology. I mean, one thing for me, it's like, when Alfonso, I think you touched base a little bit on this, like, put the ND and whatnot, and it made me think of like, the Alexas now and some other cameras, they have the internal NDs, and my ACs are always like, oh, boss, ND6, right? Or ND9 or whatever they ND call it. It's like, okay, internally. I'm like, no, guys, I don't want internal. I love shooting through glass. I don't know if it's because I'm old school, but like if I can get a 10 tray map box, I would. Obviously, I can't, but a 3 tray would do. But I'm such big into shooting through glass and just a little bit of the older school technology, because I think that's kind of keeping the organics of filmmaking, instead of kind of pushing all these buttons and gadgets on the camera. I try not to deal with the camera that much. It's almost like I dress the camera to a standard, and that's it. I leave it there, and then I just manipulate everything else around my world through what I know and the knowledge that I know.
We're definitely going to touch on this more in the post slide, but yeah, that the world of ground glass is there's such a wide range of stuff you can do mechanically to the image prior to anything in post. And I like to shoot with at least three pieces of glass and it's the oldest lens I can possibly find. But it's not everybody's style, right? Like I've shot with people who shoot clean. I've shot with people who shoot even dirtier. I know some DPs that religiously use gradient filters or religiously use streak filters. It's a look. Or everybody's using the Lomo lens.
Yeah. It's a free medium for anybody to shoot with whatever they want.
Yeah.
Who are we to judge what other people's? That's my whole thing. It's like, who am I? Like, that person shot that looks great for them. That's awesome. Like, I respect all aspects of, like, from top-notch cinematographers to the person that's just starting. Like, if that's the look you're going for and that's what you love, man, by all God, go get it.
What's your favorite filter?
Right now, I'm been using the Black Pro Mist a lot.
So good, so pretty.
Yeah. I was on the soft effects for a while, but then I switched to the Black Pro Mist. Yeah, it just depends. I think it also depends on the project. But
Alfonso, same question.
Ooh, this is actually an interesting revelation, I guess. I don't like, aside from NDs and grads and Pola, I don't like putting filters in front of the glass. The reason being is because I know how, because prior to being a filmmaker, I used to be an engineer, so I know how the mechanics of optics work. So a lens, let's say a Master Prime, it costs like $30,000-$40,000 for one lens, and there's a lot of engineering and artistry involved in there. I just can't justify putting a $4,000 glass in front of it to distort that characteristic of the lens that was intended for it. So for me, maybe I'm a bit more purist. So I'd rather find a glass that fits the look versus trying to add a filter in there as much as I can. But I do have it in my pocket sometimes, just the classic soft, and in case I do need it, but rarely I've used it, but I do have it just in case. But I'm very much into testing lenses and finding the right lens and respect the artistry of the making of the lens. Maybe because it's just my own sort of OCD about it, perhaps. I don't know, but I rarely use any. I only use NDs and polarizers and grads. So yeah, if I were to sound the image, I would do the old school way of just do netting the back of the lens.
Netting the lenses, yeah.
I'll just net the lens, then I'll get that softer look and in a more organic way, I guess. But yeah, no, don't judge me. But I don't.
Oh no, man.
That's the best. That's how you know. That's how you know you've got an old school cinematographer, right? Like they've just got a whole bunch of nylons in their truck.
Yeah, it's funny because I rarely, when people are like, oh, should we get a grad filter? I'm like, no, why? So everybody's got their taste, it's like
hey, that's the best.
I try not to use grad filters, I'm like, no, why? It's like,
I've noticed that I only use a lot more digital because I need to protect the clouds in the sky.
For sure.
In film, I never had to do that, but I know in digital, I tend to do that.
Yeah, it's so funny.
Did you have to do it? Yeah, in film, I rarely do grads.
Yeah, I just let it go. Yeah.
I have a follow-up question that is perfect for this, but I just got struck with another one while we're on filters. I used to shoot black and white photography, and when I would often use like colored filters. Do you find when you do black and white that you have ever tried that out? Is that something that's a technique that you've investigated?
I do a lot of film photography. Yeah, I do photography a lot. I don't really use as much when I shoot film on black and white. Because it enhances or subtracts one of the colors. And
right. Yeah. I still have the first yellow filter I ever bought. It's pretty. So the follow-up question I wanted to ask is, well, naturally, what's your favorite lens? Do you have a baby? Or are there ones that fight for your attention? Let's open with Alfonso on this one.
I don't think I have a favorite, but I did notice that the last maybe 4 years, I've been using a lot of the Leica Summilux Cs. just by chance. I mean, they're hard to get in every project, but I really like those. For those reasons, it gives me that softness that I like, and the range of the lenses that I like. So I use that. But I honestly, every project, when I start a project, I would try to do lens test and then compare them. And actually, I would not label what they are until later on, until they tell me. But I would just do the Rorschach thing with the director and myself, and just pick what feels right. You know, I think very often I like filmmaking the way sculptor approach sculpting. You know, I don't like when the idea of, you know, making decision based on feeling. I like to preserve that as much as possible. Even with everything now, you can really foresee everything as much as possible, see the images as much, and have a DIT, get the good look. I don't like to make decision based on you know, on what's cleaner or what's not as clean, or the specs of this. I still have to go and look at it by feeling and choose by feeling.
Andy, same question.
I'm organic when it comes to using lenses. I think it depends on the project, and it's also too on what production can afford. And you know, a lot of the times you fall on that because you want sort of the higher end lenses, and they're like, oh well, we can't afford that. But for me, again, it's not particular on the lens. I think for me it's more lighting. You know, lighting is super important, and like you can have the hottest lens, but if the light does not fall properly on your subject, it's not really gonna capture that full sort of aspect of what the lens can give you. But lately I've been, when I shoot film, I tend to go with like some newer, really sharp lenses. And then when I'm shooting digital, I kind of go with like some older Russians or anything that can really kind of give me that milkier look, just to kind of offset the sort of hardness of digital. And then sort of to complement the softness of film, I tend to use more sharper. But I'm really open. And a lot of the times, again, I'm a cinematographer that's always been like, just give me anything. You know, I want to be challenged. So it's not really like I need the hottest toys. And some of my best work has been with barely any gear that I had, or maybe I had 2 lenses in my back pocket, you know, so.
Yeah.
Personal favorite, super speeds. Love the look. Can never get enough of them.
Yeah, I guess if I had to, I'm like a cook. I'm a cook guy. That's kind of my, but again, just open to experiment with anything. Yeah.
It's nice to have options, you know.
Absolutely. There's one thing for me. I've never bought gear because I find like when you're buying gear, you're now specifically entitled to use this gear for the specific project, because now you're stuck in some investment that you should have. You know, I like to give a range to directors or productions on like, you know, I'm not just like, oh, we got to shoot on my Red or my Alexa because it's mine. And, you know, we got to use these lenses because it's mine. And there's amazing houses here, you know, production houses that have, I mean, Raw Camera, Panavision, you know, all these sort of bigger, Fusion City, Sim Video, you know, we can go for days. They have a lot of great selections, and I think it's you know, you should be open and able to shoot with whatever. Yeah.
Right. On that note, just, you know, want to touch on this for a bit here. We're talking a lot about film, but as we've talked about, mostly the, you know, access level that we have in indie tends to be digital, just because, you know, the way things go and the way the workflow is. What cameras do you prefer to use? And by that same standard, what cameras do you prefer to avoid? And I'll open this with Alfonso.
I don't think there's any camera I try to avoid. I do prefer the simplicity of just the log C that you can get out of the Alexa. So for me, just simplicity, because I also like, I don't care much about the technology of a camera. I just want to press a button and shoot it. With Red, I'm not against Red, but you know, like there's a lot more to it, and any setting that could be off, it trickles down. But I'm not, I mean, I had to shoot with red, and that was fine with me. I would shoot it with any kinds of red. I'll shoot it. That's fine with me. And I just know that I'll have to be extra careful, and everyone needs to know, like, hey, we're shooting on this, and everyone follows through. But the simplicity of the lock C from Ari, I think that's really nice. The quality, I don't think one is better than another. I think it depends on what you're looking for. But there's no camera I try to avoid shooting with. I've shot with almost anything. Even I try to find a VHS one of those DV cameras and try to shoot stuff with it as well. Like I'm never trying to avoid any camera.
Back to film school.
Yeah. It also depends on the project, you know. Like sometimes, you know, I do projects that have stunts, and I'm shooting with, you know, I have crash cams, or I have 70s or A7Ss, or, you know, GoPros. You know, the last one I shot, I think I used the Venice, you know, or I shoot a couple on red, but mainly Alexis's. I mean, that's kind of the standard to go to. You know, I finally got the chance to shoot on the Alexa large format, which was pretty impressive for me personally. Just to see the wide scope and how much you can really manipulate your framing, and in being in smaller spaces, I chose to. We had a lot of sets, so I you know, smaller sets with a lot of actors, so I really wanted to kind of show the scope. So I think it just depends on the project, but yeah, all kinds of cameras. I mean, sometimes I still just love to go out with my 7D and put it somewhere, or sneak it somewhere. I rent it to production for like an insert shot or anything like that. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, let's move on to post-production now, where, because I can talk cameras, and actually, you know what? I'm going to ask one more question, because this does pertain to post-production, and this is to do with resolution. You know, we're projecting mostly in 2K these days, although 4K is becoming more available. The US is going to be moving towards laser projection over the next 5 to 10 years. I know that the IMAX standard is now standardizing 6K. And I know that the Ursa Mini can shoot up to 12K, or the Ursa, is it the Mini? One of the Blackmagic cameras can now shoot up to 12K. How does resolution factor into what you consider? And are there differences between higher and lower resolution in terms of how, like, objects resolve on them, like fabrics and backgrounds? And are there considerations that you have to make, or are there resolutions you prefer to avoid? I know it's a big topic, but just resolution ? Let's open with Andy for this one.
I'm not big into the red system in terms of AK. Definitely, if you're doing visual effects, if it's heavy on visual effects, you know, you would need 8K, 10K, 12K. But for me, it's more about the sensor. That's why I tend to kind of stick with the Alexa systems. Again, sometimes you do want to mix the mediums. Like I said, if I do have a big screen day, green screen day, I might want to bring in, you know, an 8K red camera just to give post-production more room in terms of the visual effects. But usually I'm just looking for the sensor, which again, the Alexa sensor is phenomenal. So I usually tend to stick with that.
Same question, Alfonso.
Yeah, I do think it's not so much the amount of Ks, it's really just what the quality of, you know, photo sight per inch on the sensor, you know. And I think that Alexa captures a lot more. It's literally, I think Alexa's quality, not quantity. So they do capture a lot more stuff that I like. I think it's dictated really these days in terms of case what the deliverables are going to be, and whomever is executive producing. I find that if directors are executive producing a show, I find they have a lot more to impose. I remember we had to shoot on the red on that Netflix thing because Fincher likes to shoot a certain way, and we had to force ourselves to do it that way. And I was basically had to shoot it the same way that he shoot it. So would do a clean 8K, so no booms or anything, has to be usable. And then would do a 5K center extraction because that's what he would use, and that's what he prefers, or that's how he likes to see things. And he would nudge like a pixel over left or right, and he able to be able to reframe it. So in that way, it's a workflow situation. So you shoot 8K, but you're not really using 8K. You're just using everything that's the 5K in the middle. So it's an interesting way, and I think it's a good way if you can afford that kind of workflow. But on a outside of that Fincher world, I guess I shoot 2K. It's fine with me. I like to shoot the Alexa Mini, and the 3.2K is fine with me, or 3.8, 3.2,
3.8.
one of those. Yeah, 3.8. That's fine with me. Yeah, so it's fine with me. That's plenty, And the Alexa Mini is like 5-year-old now, like a 5-year-old camera. I still shoot with it, and I like it. The form factor is great, and so I personally can do that. But if it's a studio demands 4K, because then later on they want to do this and then HDR and all those things, then it's a whole different thing to do.
So let's move into post now. Let's move away from production, away from camera and all the requisite benefits and elements that we get to play with. So what considerations do you make in pre-production and post-production that are specifically for the color correction process? And are there decisions that you make which like begin in production that end in the color process as well? And I'll open this up with Andy.
Color correction process in pre-production.
Well, I mean, in terms of like production, like, are there decisions that you make that you're going to conclude in the color correction process?
Absolutely. I think color palette is a big one, specifically if you're doing sets. What are the sets going to look like, or the locations for coloring? Definitely wardrobe is a big one for me for pre-production. Sometimes you may not get to have a colorist like right away because production is still finding one, but definitely sitting down with a colorist and going through mood boards or anything like that you want to showcase, or perhaps even showing them movies, references, photo clips to really kind of get what the color that you're going to go for. And then in pre-production too, with the colors, I would say it's just kind of that we're both on the same page, to what the end look we're gonna want to achieve. And I know sometimes things fluctuate and they will change, but yeah, definitely just working on a lot of color palettes, seeing things physically or in photos to help me out to just give more referencing to the colors, and also I actually show some of my colorists my old stuff that I've shot in the past, so they're also aware of my style and mood and kind of what we're going after for the film.
Alfonso?
Yeah, color grading it's a process that I'm constantly refining to be better at. I guess when I say better at is the communication part of how to the intended part of the beginning of the film till the end, and the color grading, and try and communicate that with the colorist. If possible, I would love to bring colorists in the camera test, so the conversation could start early on, and then and even knowing the style of the film or the look, and then so it's not something we have to figure out in the color grade at the end, trying to figure out what the look is, or especially I find color is very important aspect of our jobs now, at least in my process. I think colors, their personality matters too, and that the way they see things matters, and that the attention to detail matters, and sensibility to skin tone matters, and all different things is very interesting to me, working with different colorists. But to me, it's very important to preserve the intended intention from the beginning, and then carry all the way to the end. I think it's one of those things where if the manipulation afterwards is better than intended, then it's great. That means like, okay, the project evolved and matured, and it's good. But not to a point of like, okay, now let's make it more commercial this way, and then let's grade it this way. I think that's not a good way to approach color grading. It's just to make it more commercial, make it more beautiful. I think those adjectives are very dangerous, at least to me. So I always need to find what feels better for the film or for the scenes. And these days I find it really hard to do remote color grading. I'm so used to being in the room with a colorist to feel the energy. There's a synergy going on, and seeing the evolution of the images, what he's doing, and pushing it this way. Or it's a beautiful interaction. And on the last project, it was in Toronto by Alter Ego Pose by a wonderful colorist, Wade Olam. And I was just sent this, the largest iPad. I think it's a 12-inch iPad, and then I'm looking at it, and it's such a small screen, and I'm looking at all of this detail, and it's hard to grade that way. And he was like over there, and I'm here, and it's such, and I'm in my space here is not calibrated for it, and it's so bright. And so I'm trying to work it that way, and it was a little bit frustrating trying to do things. But then once you build that relationship with the colorist, he would just do it, right? Like with Wade, he was able to just know what I like, what I don't like, and then be able to do all those things on his own. And then what we end up doing is we before the output, we actually screened it in a color suite to see the full effect. And then that's when we realized the blacks were actually off. And then you start seeing details when you see in a bigger screen. Then you start seeing all the different details. So it was an interesting way to work. But normally I prefer working with the colors right in the room. And as I mentioned earlier, I like to feel things and see what feels right, more based on feeling versus anything else. So if something feels like, hey, actually on the scope, this feels right, but no, I just push it more because it doesn't feel right to me, to my eyes. So I'll push it to a certain direction. So that feeling is very important to me in the color grade process. And yeah, like right now I'm in the color suite with Jason Carmen, who did Gone Delicious, and we are trying to make things work in the sense that, there's days that was cloudy, days that was sunny, and trying to find creative solutions in the color grade, trying to match it all. And so that's another thing that's great in the color grade. You having a director yourself in the colors and having those conversations, how to fix certain things as well. You don't want to fix things, but it happens. You have to fix things.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to speak on that remote coloring because I wasn't used to it until I got into network TV, and now like you never get to sit with any colorist. So I get sent images and I'm actually having to color them myself and then send them back, and it's such a strange process, of like that kind of going back to that dance, that synergy. You're like in an orchestra, you're watching them push the buttons, string that, strum that string, or like play the drums, and it has become a bit of like I've learned to let go. And I do that with a sigh because some projects you sometimes don't have control over, and those are big executives that are making the decision on the look. But when we go back to the features and anything else, sitting in there is just it's just a different feel. I mean, it's coming to light, and you're getting to see this piece of art that you've put together kind of give this slight makeover that's just going to make it better.
So I want to speak to color grading versus color timing. Working with a lab with film versus working with a colorist with digital, how's that process been for you? And I'm going to add an add-on to that is when you do shoot on film, do you also then do a color pass with a colorist? And I'm going to open this one up to Andy first.
Absolutely. I mean, now the process of I'd start with film. The process of film, it's like good luck sitting in there with a lab and really trying to it's a factory. And I mean, I go to Mel's all the time, and maybe sometimes I don't even get to choose really how they're going to be really processing the film. But that's why I think it's important that you sit with a colorist afterwards, and I still go through the process of coloring, because there's less labs now that that's becoming tougher to do unless you're potentially a multi-billion-dollar movie, and you can do that process. But I have found it in my personal career lately that I have not had the chance to do that with the film and work with the lab. It's just like, here is my footage, I get a digital copy back, and then I sit with a colorist. So I can't answer on to really that question.
Alfonso?
Yeah, I only done small project that we actually timed it in the lab, but very often when DI came, like we just scanned in DI and then just just graded digitally. I think that still works best for me because you have a lot more control, and it's as the software evolves for color grading, whether it's Resolve or Baselight, you can do so much as well. And so I think having a DI transfer, it's so convenient, so great. So I think why not embrace both worlds? So I don't foresee. It'll be so painful trying to do a lab timing, because then it's like how much this you want to add, how much that, and the temperature. It'll be so chemical. And you have to be a chemist to really know all of that stuff.
That used to be half the craft. It's completely disappeared now.
I think cinematographer has enough pressure and stress on set and prep and everything. I don't think I want more of that.
Release my stress.
Right. So okay, well, I mean that's illuminating, so to speak. Without naming names, and obviously we'll leave network television out of this. We'll talk more with regards to shorts and features for this question, but without naming names, have you ever not been invited to a color session? And did you find that had an impact on the final product?
By
all means.
Yeah, I've been on some productions that the director and the producers get into a fight, and then or some argument, and then the project goes sideways and I don't hear anything about it. So yeah, absolutely. I think we work in a very strange medium where art is kind of ever evolving, and you have to learn to let go of some things. And I have been on those productions where I hadn't had a chance at all to sit in those rooms because or sometimes productions where they ran out of money.
Been there.
Yeah.
Alfonso?
I guess it depends. Commercially, you don't get to do that as much. There's the brand themselves, the creative director, they have already a particular look. And even a colors in mind, and so they know what to do. I think for the most part, everything I've done, narratively, short film or features, I've been in the room. I try to make myself available. I think maybe there's only 1 or 2 short films I wasn't able to because of schedule, but I will still look at the output and make notes and stuff. But I try to be involved because that's like a big process for cinematography.
I guess I want to ask this question, with regards to other parts of the post process. Do you as a cinematographer like to have any relationship with the edit itself, or is that something that you leave out of your purview? And by that same standard, do you find that working with an editor in pre-production helps you in any way? And I'll open this one up to Alfonso first.
Maybe in prep, maybe when we start talking about shot lists or storyboards and things like that. I don't like to get involved too much in the edit because that's the editor's temple, I guess, to really them. It's a collaboration. You find things. What I do sometimes ask is feedback, and then I'll say, "Oh, this scene, feels fast or slower, or I didn't get the information on this scene from this." But I don't really in the process of the edit. I don't get involved. Afterwards, okay, time to color grade. Then I see the cut.
And Andy?
Yeah, I'm the same with Alfonso. I try not to get involved in the edit unless I'm asked for to give an opinion on what I think, but I think that's more the director and the editor for them to do so and spend time together. I do, however, though, sometimes like to work with the editor in terms of choice of the shot that he chose, or perhaps whether, there was a better, that I thought there was a better lighting in one particular thing, or maybe I tweak something for the second take, So in that sense, sometimes I do like work closely with the scriptie to make sure that the editor is getting the notes in terms of like, hey, just let the editor know that maybe take 3 was really good because she landed right at the, in her key light or whatever that may be. But no, I try not to manipulate. I think, the beauty about cinematography is that you're there, you do the job, and then you watch it being birthed by the editor and the director, and then you get to sort of manipulate the look of it in post.
Mm-hmm. As we've kind of reached the end of our questions, I want to ask, is there anything you would like directors or producers to understand or know about the cinematographer's role that you find kind of gets pushed by the wayside when working in indie or when working with emerging artists? And I'll open this question with Alfonso.
As in like restricted with something or
in terms of over the course of your experience as a cinematographer working with people at various skill levels and various points in their career, is there stuff that you wish that more directors and producers knew about your craft that would make your life easier when working with newer and emerging artists?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you read about all this natural lighting, it doesn't mean you just shoot whenever, it doesn't mean it's faster. It's that sometimes actually it's a complicated process. You need to scout the location, when the light is good, when the sun is hitting, and then rehearse the scene and then shoot when the lighting appears. So it's actually not just, there's a misconception of shooting naturalistic. It means it's faster, it's cheaper, and it's quicker, and it's not really true. And you still, it's same as the idea of lighting. Something is keeping consistent and their angles are better and creating a mood and things like so. Same thing. You're just doing it with natural light, but you have to find those sweet spots for that. So I don't think they understand that sometimes, or even when it's asking for, I don't know, like just cranes and just getting a couple of fly squatters here and there, and why these lock the street is because of the direction of the sun, and sometimes it needed. Or generators, or need more generators because bigger lights needs more, and then sometimes I get pushback. Can you reduce it? Can you not use another 18K or something, or a 9K? But then it's like, okay, well, I have to keep consistent because of this and that, and also I think I have sometimes find, I don't know if same for you, Andy, but for night scenes, they just think about lighting the scene. They don't think about lighting the background. So I have to ask for, so I have to ask for lights. And it's like, oh, yes, the scene's happening here, but we see the back. It's like it's gonna be dark. I gotta put some light in there. We gotta put that second block over there and put a light it, or else it's gonna be dark. So they don't understand that. So I sometimes get pushback when I ask for more light in the back. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those are all great points, Alfonso. I mean, we could go for days. They don't understand anything. No, they do. I think for me is two things. One, I'll start with lighting. I'm very big in like, give me one large source and I can manipulate it with gripping however I want. And they think that by having a bigger, expensive one light source is going to save them more money than having like 30 fixtures there, right? So that for me is really hard to tell them like, hey, I just need one light and I can light this whole room. But, it's really tough for them to understand about the generators or getting anything like that. Or, oh, now we're going to need an extra guy because we got to lift the 18K onto the super crank or whatnot. But yeah, definitely that. Another thing I struggle with, guys, and something that we haven't touched on is actually like, I get involved with this because it's really personal to me, is like people's rates, like how much they're paying. And we haven't touched on this, and this, like, I get furious when they want to hire me and then they're like, okay, well, you get the key grip, get the whole team, get the camera team. And then they're like, oh, it's $250 a day for your keys. And I'm like, what? Like, this is something that I think producers need to understand. I don't know in particular that directors need to understand this, but producers need to understand that the value, what you get, you got to get the wage up. Like, wages need to go up because the more my career advances, I want to bring people up. But if you're not paying sufficiently, like, we're not going to do a good job for you. And I think that's really tough for them to understand where the value stands, you know, of like, I had this conversation on the last movie I tried to get hired, and that's probably why I didn't get hired, because I was fighting for my crew, even an extra $50, you know, like the keys from 450. I was like, let's just pay all keys 500. Let's pay the B op 700, whatever those rates are. And it was just like, yeah, I didn't land the gig, but I personally think that like standing up for my crew and like wages is my one big battle that I'm always having with PMs or producers.
So how do you balance?
So true. So true.
How do you balance that on indie productions, like a production which, you know, has to work on a micro budget? Is it just you're like a lot of DPs at certain skill levels are going to be out of the range of access? Are there concessions that you would make? Are lower crew counts or bringing on newer people? Like how do you balance that world? And I mean, Andy, you can speak to this as being a producer. How do you balance that? How do you effectively navigate that world of the lack of budget balancing with the necessity of certain crew wages being appropriate?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one way now that I see is, you know, looking at the script and depending on the size of the script, and it's working kind of backwards from the script. You know, okay, let's look at the script. What particular scenes? What are they going to need? What's the manpower? And for me, like, if we can dial down one scene so I don't need that, or we can move a scene interior so I don't need that fly swatter, that gets me an extra guy, or it helps me bump the rate because now I can save the $500 that I need for, you know. So kind of in that sense, I look at it and play like that in terms of like, how can I, as a cinematographer, for example, something that I do now is like, if they want camera, I say, okay, B camera can play for half the days, and let's take the rest of that money and put it into the crew, right? Or let's put it into, you know, another thing, let's put it into a trainee, you know, the days of the trainees, because people need to learn, people need to come up as well. So it's a tough balance. I tend more for the indie world. I tend to find people who really are passionate and are wanting to, and then being able to at least provide $200 or something that you could say, hey, I know we can't pay you the 450, the 500 for key, but here's $200 on this short film. And you know what? That goes a long ways, man. That's either gas money or it's food money, and they're learning from you. And I tend to, a lot of the times when I do smaller projects and I have time, I like to teach people on set. So I'll either have people jump, like quickly operate a shot, or like, you know, practice the light meter. Like, let me show you the light metering, or, you know, talk to them about a specific shot, because I think that's the importance of what we're doing. You know, I grew up, you know, working and seeing some of cinematographers that shoot, you know, Planet of the Apes and Mission Impossible and all these, you know, movies that I got to luckily be a grip and dolly grip on, watching these big time cinematographers doing their work. And we're leaders, and I think we need to lead, and I think we need to have that balance of like beautiful art, but also very business, the business.
Alfonso?
Yeah, the one thing that I struggled the most in the past was how to create an ecosystem where the short film world, especially, they don't have enough money to hire a crew for quality stuff. So what I end up doing a lot is trying to scale down the project and see what we can actually do. But one thing I end up doing a lot is, because now I can do bigger project, is I'll do one big one and bring those crew on and they get proper rate. And then when they know that I love working with, you know, smaller short films or experimental films, and then I'll ask them as a favor. It's like, hey, this one, it won't be much, but it's very meaningful to me. This project means a lot to me. That's why I always have to ask the question why the director wants to do it. And if it's very meaningful to the director, I empathize with that, and then I jump on board, and then I'll say, but I really want to do it, and I really want to do it this way. And so maybe a gaffer and keeper if they're the experienced one, and then I'll say, hey, let's bring a couple people just to it's a good experience to they can teach them and learn. And everyone who works with me knows that I am very open to anything they ask me to do to even. So on short films, usually if I'm doing something and ask me, oh, why am I doing it, I'll explain. So that inspires also. Like maybe there's a future cinematographer on the crew, like that's how it evolves. I camera assisted before, and I remember like all those things that DP share is very valuable and inspiring. Like it's not a secret that we have this thing. It's just through experience you learn, trial and error, and you learn things. So I share a lot of those things. So and part of it. So the ecosystem I try to create is that sort of giving back, and it's a flow, it's a more sustainable way of flowing with short films and higher production budgets. And even on some features, they don't have that much money either. So I have to bring people that with that mix, experience and non-experience, and try to mix it up together.
Favors are such an important currency. Yeah, no, that's a very real question. I mean, it's so difficult where, especially in the world of short films, the budgets are almost non-existent, and obviously, like, the less experienced crew you have, the more money you're spending on things that a more experienced crew wouldn't be encountering. And so that becomes a really difficult balance for a lot of people who are just starting out. So it's great advice to carry forward with. As we're kind of wrapping up to a close here, I want to ask, what do you guys see for the futures of your careers? Where are you moving towards? What kind of work do you want to be doing? If people are watching this and they're like, hey, I want to reach out to those people, what type of work are you kind of aspiring to do? And let's talk about that for a bit. Let's start with Andy on this.
I think for me, realizing that I can now kind of jump into the factory of filmmaking is really important in my career, to understand that, yes, I can do the passion and the indie projects and, get into some awesome festivals and be able to shoot, 2 pages a day and, really experiment. I think in the feature I did in El Salvador, I shot 3.40 aspect ratio and like really experimented with some deliverables. They couldn't even take it, but that was okay. But it was just a way for me to play, right? And to really stick to my craft. And so continuing to do that, continuing to do meaningful movies, but also really like explore more of what TV has, because I think life is always changing. I mean, work is always changing. I think our cinematography needs to always change. I understand some cinematographers just want to stick to the one medium, and that's fine, but I'm open to all kinds of challenges. I would love to, maybe go from the network TV to maybe try and do some CWs, or some Riverdales, and then maybe a TV series. I did do a kids Netflix show, 10 episodes, which was kind of my first time doing a long series, so that was nice. But I'm open. I think in my career coming up, there's going to be a lot of beautiful projects coming up, and there's going to be a lot of chances to really experiment where I can go with it. So
I worked a lot of CW starting out, and I gotta say that, like, I'm actually quite impressed by some of the work that some of those shows put out. It's not an insult to say you're working on a CW show, I don't think.
You just keep practicing. For me, it's all practice. It's all practice. It's like any sport. You just got to keep practice.
Alfonso, same question.
Yeah, I mean, I think every project has its own purpose, and I try to learn from every project as well. And commercials, I'll get gears that because commercial can pay for it, I'll test something. Use it as a testing ground, because I'm like, okay, well, this is new gear. Okay, let's bring this commercial and test it out. Because it's a very safe thing to do, because you can probably achieve it with, something. And then I want to in technology, bring it and learn something about it. I don't put a cap. I used to think about, like, I only want to do like the films that I love, like the Cannes Film Festival winner or whatever, but I don't think like that anymore. I think when you start to think of cinematography also as a job and as a means to sustain a long career, I I'm open for anything really. I shoot almost everything as well. I haven't shot in MOW yet, just because I don't know how to work in that system. You know, I don't know how to make a movie in 13 days.
Talk to Andy.
So maybe with the right team and everything, yeah, sure, I'll try one. But so far I haven't done that world yet. But I'm always open to try different things. Not, you know, sometimes maybe it's artistically, sometimes maybe it's just with the experience of trying a different format. And I definitely want to do more longer series, like, you know, like 10 episode or even 6 episode or 8 episodes series. I think those would be really fun to do. But I always also I know myself, my personality is like, I can't do like 2 back-to-back features. I know after I do 2 features, I have to do like, I don't know, like a doc series or a short or something. And then once I've done that, okay, now I want to try something else. So I need to mix it up. I can't do, unless it's like a long series for 8 months, sure, you know, that's fine. Maybe I'll do that for 1 year, and the next year I'll just do everything else but the series. So I have to fluctuate it because I just can't repeat myself constantly on the same format. And so I still love experimental stuff. So whenever there's a chance, even there's no budget for it, I'll try and make it work. Even
I'm going to keep that in mind.
So yeah, so it fluctuates all the time. I get bored easily as well. If I were to do the same thing over and over, I would lose that passion. So.
Last question I'm going to ask is, do you guys have any advice for emerging cinematographers where they're starting, anything that you wish that you had known when you were starting out, things that you wish you had done, or advice that you would like to bestow onto emerging cinematographers? And I'll open with Alfonso on this one.
It's an interesting one, because I always look for those whenever I listen to aspiring cinematographers. I always look for that keyword, you know, like something that is gonna get me started. I think it's a compilation of all the advices. I don't really have one particular one.
Just this whole panel.
Yeah, I know for sure. I know for sure. For me, something that got me going is, and it's a test to how badly you want to be in film. Every year, it's like it's. I always have this like 1% in my brain says maybe I should stop doing this. You know, like every year, there's always that question in my mind, like especially right after like a very long project or very stressful one. And there's somebody's like, oh, it'd be nice to do something else. But then once I like get some sleep, I wake up next day and it's like, no, I want to keep doing this because I really love this. So it's always a constant testament. So I think it's really finding in you what really sparked that energy and the desire and why you're doing it in the first place, and how your life would be if you didn't do this.
Mm-hmm.
I always come back to it because I just know this is just, that's amazing for me. I just can't picture myself doing anything else. So that's kind of what my advice is, like really reach deep inside of you and think what sparks that desire to keep doing it.
How about on a technical side?
On a technical side, I think photography, to be honest. So like my Instagram is my playground. I test all kinds of things. It's your best focus group, you know.
It's a great playground.
Yeah, and so I would go and experiment with things, you know. Yet have to do something very colorful, very like Blade Runner-esque in my narrative world work, but in my photography, I'm playing with that. So I think just play with it and find what you like and what you don't like.
Andy, same questions.
Technically, I guess for me would be get out and shoot. You know, get out and shoot, whether it's with friends, whether it's just for yourself. You know, whether it's you raising a little bit of money to do your first short film. I think creating content has become very accessible. So whether you're making, short films with iPhone, or you're using the A7S, or you are able to get some of the higher end cameras. And also one thing that I always do is I'm so mindful about lighting. So whenever I'm walking around, I don't take photography, Alfonso. I'm a terrible photographer, but whenever I'm walking around, I'm always looking at how the light's hitting a building, or how it's falling, or how something's backlit. I recently took up golfing, and I'm always looking at the way the light comes through the trees, and when somebody's backlit, or I'm always kind of, how is dusk feeling today? Oh, the temperature of the light's a lot bluer than it was yesterday. So it's kind of like becoming aware of your environment through lighting. I'm very also in my own home. I like this, like I want it to be nice and dark, and so like I have a lot of bounce light, floor lighting. I like up lighting, as you can tell right now, where this light's coming right from here. So like I lit myself for this, so that's I'm constantly thinking about that, because before I'd be like this, right? And I'll give you a great example. This is me now, and I'm like, wait, but how do I light myself better so when I have interviews, okay? So I'm always constantly, this is how nerdy I am. I actually close my blinds slightly so the light is a little softer on my face when I'm having these interviews. So that's what I mean. Like, if you can begin to think like that in every aspect of your life, man, I'm telling you, you'll be a great cinematographer. Like, or maybe it's just me being a little bit too crazy.
I've been told that the sign of a cinematographer is you look in their cell phone, and if what you see is just pictures of light, then you know that they're a cinematographer.
And then, yeah, another one is really important is patience. And I say this personally, guys, because patience, guys, patience. Your time will come. You just got to keep shooting. There was a time in my first 10 years of my career that I doubted myself, that I compared myself to other cinematographers. And I was like, why am I even in this? Am I even good enough? And when I had the patience and ready to kind of release all of that, like I bloomed, my lighting bloomed, and I started getting hired. So it's the longevity. It's the long game. It's the long haul. And I think the more patient you are, and the less you are comparing yourself to others, and just really owning in on what you love to do, you'll succeed.
Excellent. So I asked the same question at the end of the producers panel just before, but I'm going to ask it here as well. What can you plug of yours? What's coming up? What are we going to be able to see next? And what are you particularly proud of that just came out? Let's open with Alfonso on this.
I have two features I'm very proud of that's coming out. Two very different budget, actually. So there's Gone Delicious, which is found to watch budget, and then that was an interesting experience because I love the script, but it's not a lot of resources. And then I just love how the community came together to make that happen. And then there's Float, that is a landscape and elevation and all the studio. And that's a completely different opposite feature that had way more money. It's both of them are about Asian identities and about the relationship with society and generational traumas or generational stigmas. So I'm very excited for those two projects.
Do you want to talk about your Netflix project?
My initiative?
Yeah.
No, there's nothing to talk about.
Some things you got to keep under wrap.
Andy, what can we see of yours coming up?
Well, I'm super excited, guys. 2 of my movies just launched on Amazon Prime, so now people are actually getting to watch them, and it's been amazing to just be able to see some of my work on some of these platforms now, and be able to go to different households and be able to see what you've shot. So that's super exciting. And I'm actually super excited, guys. I just shot a little pilot called Gen Zeros that will be coming out, and I don't get to often do a lot of sci-fi, so I'm super excited. There's a lot of visual effects. It's very futuristic. It's like 200 years after the aliens have left. So that'll be coming out. I'm super excited to drop that.
Very cool. Well, I want to thank you guys for coming and joining us on this panel here. As I said at the beginning, you are 2 of my favorite cinematographers in Vancouver. I look at your work endlessly, and I've known you guys for forever, and I think the world of you. And I'm just so happy that you come out here and talk and let me pick your brain for 2 hours and 45 minutes about film And we don't often get to talk about film in the indie scene in Vancouver. So it is really nice to talk to two cinematographers that have had a breadth of experience, but also kind of understand where indie is coming from. So yeah, just thank you guys for both being a part of this.
Thank you. And Alfonso, man, it's such a pleasure to sit on this panel with you, man. I think highly of your work, even though I probably never even met you face to face, but it was a pleasure to hear a lot of great insight. And actually, you gave me some ideas that I never even would have thought of. So thank you.
No, Andy, come on, same thing. And before this started, I was just saying, Andy, like this is probably the first time we actually been in the same space virtually. And we know I follow your work as well. And you actually shot some stuff when I was not available to. So we're never been in the same space, but we actually overlapped a few times, but we never really like been in the same space yet.
Honestly, it's so wild to me that like you can operate in the same indie industry and have never met each other, but I know the both of you, and the fact that neither of you have met each other yet is wild.
Well, now I know who to go to if I need a replacement DP.
There you go.
There you go.
So I'm just gonna outro us here. I want to thank our panel for joining us today, Andy Hodgson and Alfonso Chin. I want to thank Creative BC, the Vancouver Short Film Festival, and our community partners, Cinevic, Kamloops Film Society, and the Vancouver International Film Festival for allowing us the opportunity to have this conversation today. I want to thank our festival co-directors, Emily Weldon and Nick Ayerba-Barona. And again, we will be hosting a VSFF Keep It Short speed meeting event on Sunday after our final panel, so around 3 p.m. Please register for the event at vsff.com. So that you can receive an email with the information on how you can join that, so we can send that off to you. And also, our directors panel tomorrow will be at around noon. So please join us for that. You can also register for that at vsff.com. We are thrilled to have you here. And again, thank you, panel. It's so wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Abby.